I'm going to call this hearing to order. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. My name is Bonnie Lowenthal. I chair the Transportation Committee in the State Assembly. And I want to thank Assemblymember Bradford, members of the Utilities and Commerce Committee, as well as members of the Transportation Committee for coming. And Mr. Bradford, thank you very much for joining me in this hearing. I'd like to thank Assembly members Mike Eng and Swanson for being here. And I also want to thank the presenters for coming today. For many people, electric vehicles are an emerging technology, a wave of the future. In reality, however, electric vehicles are not new to California or to the world. Rather, people have been exploring this personal transportation vehicle option for over 2 decades now. The electric vehicle industry is evolving, however, and we are moving closer to wide-scale deployment in California, aided, among other things, by developments in technology and especially improvements in battery durability. Still, there are many unanswered questions, and it behooves us to pause and take stock of where the state, the auto manufacturers, and the electric utilities stand with regard to large-scale implementation of electric vehicles. The purpose of this hearing is fourfold. First, to understand from the regulators exactly what it is that is expected or mandated in the way of zero-emission vehicles, such as electric vehicles. Second, where are the auto manufacturers with regard to meeting California's goals related to electric vehicles? Third, are the utilities ready and able to provide the electricity to, quote, fuel these vehicles? And finally, where is private industry with regard to providing, for instance, the infrastructure in support of electric vehicles? Will there be an infrastructure in place on time? The timing of this hearing couldn't be better. A lot of very exciting developments have recently been announced. For example, this past week, Tesla Motors announced a partnership with Toyota to build electric cars at NUMMI, the Fremont location where Toyota discontinued the assembly of traditional cars earlier this year. Further, President Obama announced support for electric and hybrid vehicles, saying federal monies would be spent to support the development of a national infrastructure to support alternative fuel vehicles. And last Friday, the California Public Utilities Commission released a significant proposed finding. As proposed by the PUC, entities that provide electricity at retail to the public for use only as a motor vehicle fuel will not be regulated as a utility. I look forward to hearing more about the impact of this finding from our presenters today. And earlier this year, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District announced that it is funding more than 200 electric vehicle charging stations at 48 locations around the region. Electric vehicles are an important tool that we need to reduce our dependence on fossil-fueled vehicles and reduce our carbon emissions pursuant to the AB 32 greenhouse gas reduction mandate. We need to be poised to have the vehicles ready to be sold, conveniently operated, and recharged, and at affordable costs. Hence, the need for this hearing. So with that, I'm very excited to begin. I want to thank my Vice Chair, Assemblymember Kevin Jeffries, for being here today. Before we start, I'd like to ask my colleague, Assemblymember Bradford, Chair of the Assembly UNC Committee, to say a few words.
Thank you, Ms. Lowenthal. And I want to thank all of those who are here today to testify. Your input is critical as we move forward in this issue as a hybrid. Is this on? No. Okay, again, I want to thank all of you for being here today to participate in this hearing, and your testimony will be critical as we move forward in this area, and I'm looking forward to hearing from each and every one of you. And as electric vehicles become more and more the popular use here in California, how do we address this growing industry? And some questions that need to be answered are who will pay for the upgrades to the electrical infrastructure? Will widespread use of hybrid or electrical vehicles have an impact on reliability and on our system and stability on the grid? Who builds the recharging stations? Is it the utilities? Does private investors put this into place? Do we need to consider the cost beyond the meter? Is it a different commodity than provided at the regulated meter? And again, the economic opportunities from the standpoint of workforce training for the construction and maintenance of both the vehicles and the necessary infrastructure, making sure all Californians get a chance to participate in this growing economy. And the biggest question is to make sure that our legislation doesn't get in front of the technology and make sure that there's no stranded costs for ratepayers who will never take advantage of having a hybrid in their home. So we need to be cognizant of that. And so as we move forward today, I hope we have opportunity to address all those issues. And I thank my co-chair for convening this hearing today, Ms. Lowenthal, in Transportation, and all the members of the committee who are participating here today. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford. Would any of my colleagues like to say a word or two? No? No. In that case, let's start with our first panel on electric vehicle laws and regulations. And would you please come up and introduce yourselves? You each have 10 minutes to speak, and following which we'll have questions before we move on to our next panel. Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Tom Coquette. I'm the Chief Deputy at the California Air Resources Board, and glad to be back here again today. What I'd like to do is, in my 10 minutes, is give you a little bit of context, background, which I hope will help you and the following speakers, and then also give you the context of how electric vehicles and zero-emission technologies fit into some of the broader environmental goals of the state of California. So I thought I'd start off by just making sure we know what we're talking about in terms of electric vehicles, because there's quite a variety of them. The first one here is a hybrid, and if you recognize this one, it's the Toyota Prius, very popular, clearly commercialized vehicle. Next one is an example of that hybrid that has an electric plug on it, and that's called a plug-in hybrid. And in this case, you can charge the batteries. They're relatively limited range, maybe 20 to 40 miles, but you can also run the vehicle on gasoline, and that's also with the hybrid. It's an electric vehicle, but you never plug it in. It gets all of its electricity from just running its gasoline engine. So the distinction here is the plug-in can do it two ways, rather the regular hybrid just one. Here's a battery electric vehicle on sale right now for delivery later in the year by Nissan. It's called the Leaf, and it only runs on electricity, so you have to be tethered to a place where you can recharge it. It has about a 100-mile range. And finally, there's a fuel cell vehicle. You may not think of this as being an electric vehicle, but in fact it is. It's a complete electric vehicle. It happens to get its electrons by stripping them off the hydrogen atom, and does so by using hydrogen stored in a fuel tank. So it has a different infrastructure need, but in fact it is an electric vehicle. So we have requirements for what we call zero-emission vehicles, and that word is reasonably synonymous with the electric vehicles that I just showed you. We had a regulation that was adopted over 20 years ago that requires auto manufacturers to produce a specified number of electric vehicles or near zero-emitting vehicles over time. It had a long lead time because it was clearly forcing technology, and it started in 2003 and has subsequently been ramping up at quite a slow rate. The purpose of this is to accelerate the path by which these vehicles get out of the demonstration or laboratory phase, or 50 or 100 of them running around on the streets, and to the point where they can be called early commercialization, sales in the thousands or tens of thousands. And the benefits are twofold. One is cleaner air, because they have very low or zero tailpipe emissions, and their fuel emissions are very low as well. And they're also extremely efficient. So that means that they're very low in carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas emissions. And for AB 32 and other goals that try to address greenhouse gas, this is very important. So what have this ZEV regulation accomplished to date? Well, it's very clear that it has moved hybrid electric vehicles like the Prius into the commercialized stage. We've had over 250,000 produced and sold in California. Most of them Priuses, although there are a growing number of models available today, probably a dozen now or so. Battery electric vehicles, we actually have 30,000 of them, which may surprise you, although most of them at this stage are those ones down in the corner, the small neighborhood electric vehicles that are limited to 25 miles an hour, but you see them running around here on Capitol grounds and as transportation throughout Sacramento. Fuel cell vehicles, we have the largest fleet in the world, but that happens to be 250 at the moment, and they're centered at the Fuel Cell Partnership in West Sacramento, which is core of addressing the issue of how do you get infrastructure for hydrogen in place. And finally, plug-in vehicles. There really aren't any of them out there now, but they go on sale. General Motors will be the first one with large-scale production this fall, or winter, I guess would be the best time. So why are we doing all this? We're doing it because of climate change at this point in time. This graph shows you for all sources, not just transportation, where we are today in the left column, where we'll be due to growth by 2020, and you can see here's the target for AB 32. It's to get back to 1990 levels. And here's the target that most people think is necessary to help stabilize on a worldwide basis the temperature of the globe. And you can see that's about an 80% reduction from 1990 levels by 2050. A very daunting, as you may guess, challenge. So it turns out that the ZEV regulation, which has been in place for a while, can really help make this happen. And some of the vehicles that can actually achieve an 80% reduction in greenhouse gases are battery electric vehicles, fuel cell vehicles, and hybrid vehicles if they don't run on gasoline, but they run on a renewable fuel, liquid fuel, like renewable ethanol. All these are electric drive vehicles. They're very efficient. On a gasoline equivalent basis, they get 75 miles to the gallon or better, way better than most cars today. And to do this, they also need to use fuels that have very little carbon in the fuel. Clearly, an electron can be that way if it's made properly, and that's an example of a low-carbon fuel. We have to do both things, not just clean cars, but clean fuels. So here's where the near future looks like for the ZEV regulation. This is in place in regulation today, and you can see for the 3-year periods of 2012 through 14, the vehicle manufacturers cumulatively will produce around 7,500 either battery or fuel cell vehicles and around 60,000 plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. And then in the next 3-year window, that number jumps for battery electric vehicles about three times or so to 25,000. And beyond that, in 2018, it's still under development, but the regulation is scheduled to be revised so that it will help support the full commercialization of these technologies. Here's what kind of needs to happen to make all this work. We need some clean vehicles for sale today in the 2010 timeframe. We've got them. We've got all of these are out there in very limited numbers today. But we need more models. It's not useful to have just a Toyota Prius because maybe you don't want to buy a Toyota Prius. Maybe you want a station wagon. Maybe you want a van. Maybe you want a small mini car. You need to have a variety of models in order to get the volume of cars up. Then, sometime around 2025, we need to rapidly accelerate the number of models available of these zero-emitting vehicles and the number that are sold until at the end of that period, around 2035, nearly all the models are clean, these low-carbon vehicles. And then we can wait 15 years for the old vehicles to turn over and become the clean vehicles. That's the pathway that's necessary to achieve an 80% reduction by 2050. And I guess you can easily conclude that what we need to do is start now, even though it's 40 years away. You just can't get there by waiting. This is what one scenario would have you believe that the fleet, the actual on-road fleet, looks like in 2050. And you can see on the right-hand side in the yellow and gold that fuel cell vehicles and battery electric vehicles would account for 80% of the vehicles on the road. And the rest would be combinations of plug hybrid, and very few leftover gasoline vehicles that still have not made their way to the junkyard yet. This is what's necessary if this 80% reduction is going to be met. Well, there's barriers to this, a lot of them, and one of them is cost. That in high volume, we expect that these battery electric vehicles, fuel cell vehicles, will cost between $3,000 and $5,000 more than a Prius-type hybrid, which is already something like $2,500 more than a conventional car. And to help address that, and particularly in the earlier years when these costs may be even higher, there's going to be need for some kind of incentive to make people buy them, at least a large number of people buy them. Could be money. We're offering incentives of $5,000 for zero-emitting vehicles right now, but we clearly don't have the funds to do large volumes. Other incentives are things like access to HOV lanes, free parking, things like that that would make these cars stand out and people want to buy them, aside from their fantastic performance, by the way. Second issue is infrastructure for non-petroleum fuels. The hydrogen vehicles, fuel cell vehicles, are a unique case. I know hydrogen is not the subject here, but as you saw from my chart, the majority of the vehicles might end up being hydrogen vehicles. Since they only run on hydrogen, you can't sell them if you can't fuel them. So the need for the initial infrastructure almost before the vehicles get here is important. On the electric side, I think it's reasonably solvable that we can get outlets in everybody's garage that buys one of these vehicles. But the vehicles are range limited, 100 miles, something on that order. And so we're going to need to figure out infrastructure ways of expanding the use of the vehicles, including possible quick charging in the suburban areas, so you could extend your trip, maybe connecting nearby destination areas to urban areas like San Diego to Los Angeles, for example, with a quick charge where you could get 80% refill in 30 minutes. Finally, we have to have low-carbon fuels. That means electricity has to be cleaned up so that there's fewer carbon atoms going into its production. And I put AB 1505, which the legislature has already addressed, which requires a third of the hydrogen produced for hydrogen vehicles to be renewable. Those kinds of policies are the things that I think have to be in parallel with the vehicles. So in summary, meeting climate goals is going to move us away from petroleum towards electric drive vehicles. They're going to be a lot more efficient, maybe 3 times as efficient as today's vehicles, and they're going to use fuels that have very little or no carbon associated with them. They're going to be more costly, and so we'll have to make a transition from the current costs, and incentives are important there. And finally, low-carbon fuels need to be made available, and the 3 fuels that we think will be predominant in the 2050 timeframe are electricity, hydrogen, and renewable liquid fuels, whether that's cellulosic ethanol or other ways of making liquid fuels, but they have to be essentially something that's been grown so that you capture the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere in the growth process and don't put new carbon into the atmosphere from the use of the vehicles. So that completes my presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Next speaker, please. Mr. Smith.
Need to find my presentation.
We're having some computer things. Is there somebody that can help change? Oh. We have a rescue person on the way.
There you go.
There we go.
Would you like to introduce yourself too, please?
Thank you very much for the invitation to speak here today. Sorry for the technical difficulties.
No problem.
My name is Michael Smith. I'm the Deputy Director for Fuels and Transportation at the California Energy Commission. And I'm going to focus my brief comments on our efforts at putting infrastructure in place that will meet the needs of the rollout of the EVs coming into the market. I want to point out initially, or at least first, that in addition to the state's climate change objectives and policies, there are other policies that we are focused on also. Petroleum reduction goals to reduce the use of fuel to 15% below 2003 levels by 2020. And there are alternative and renewable fuel use goals to increase the amount of fuel into the marketplace. So I just want to make sure the committee understands that there's a suite of objectives that we're focused on in addition to climate change, all with the intent of transitioning this vast market away from petroleum fuels to non-petroleum fuels. Right now, there's approximately 413 charging stations in California. Each station may have multiple charging points, chargers on them, so there's approximately 1,300 public access charging points throughout California. Many of these have been in place for a number of years, and one of the first things we need to do is identify which of those existing stations and sites are strategically placed enough to be meaningful as the market for EVs expand. And then once that's done, to then upgrade these chargers to the new SAE standard. In order to really even meet the initial rollout of EVs that are expected later this year and certainly going into the next couple of years, a much larger network needs to be put in place. We have data, now here, this is in contrast to a piece of information presented Mr. Coquette's. We showed 15,000 PEVs registered in California, but admittedly this is 2008 data, so I'm sure Tom's is fresher. And over the last year and a half, there's probably been more purchases, namely of the small neighborhood vehicles. So anywhere from 15 to 30,000 registered vehicles. However, in looking at the future, even over the next 4 or 5 years, we see estimates of anywhere from 125,000 to upwards of 500,000 PEVs on the road by 2015. The only point in presenting this very wide range is to convey the uncertainty with which we're looking at in terms of trying to define the market for EVs and how much infrastructure would be needed to meet this demand. So there's a great challenge here. So beyond just what the ZEV mandate will require, there will be the market pull once these vehicles start to be sold, and consumers, hopefully, we're expecting will demand them, and so the numbers get larger. So it makes our challenge to plan for and install infrastructure that much greater. Just very quickly to summarize the incentives that are available, there are federal tax credits, as Tom had mentioned. There's tax credits for charging infrastructure that will expire at the end of this calendar year. There are federal tax credits available for plug-in hybrid electric conversions. ARB, as Tom mentioned, has an incentive for up to $5,000 for the purchase of plug-in electric vehicles. Tom also mentioned the HOV lane. This actually, interestingly enough, is actually a very strong incentive for folks to buy cars that are eligible for these lanes. And then lastly, of course, in California, we have the AB 118 program, which is providing incentives for the rollout, the build-out of infrastructure, and in this case, electric charging infrastructure. Very quickly, the summation of the program, it's about $100 million a year. The statute is very broad in terms of what is eligible for this funding. So just about anything that can be used or put in place to accelerate the introduction of alternative and renewable fuels in California is eligible. I might also point out that the authors of the bill were wise in recognizing that it's not just putting fuels and vehicles into the marketplace, but you need a new workforce trained to accommodate, to maintain and service these new vehicles and new fueling infrastructure. So we are indeed making investments through this program in alternative fuels and alternative vehicle workforce training as part of even our first round of funding. Education and outreach is important if you really want to engage the consumers, and we also have the ability to do market assessments and environmental assessments to keep information fresh. Very quickly, we have made thus far, over the last year, awards totaling about $15.3 million for electric charging. Part of these awards were made for projects that came through the Energy Commission as part of the ERA solicitations last year. DOE had a number of solicitations. One in particular was for vehicle electrification and clean cities. And so we provided cost share to a number of California applicants who were seeking some of these federal ARA funds for EV charging infrastructure. So we have partnered up with a number of entities to do that. We also recently have closed our own state solicitation through the AB 118 program, in which we sought state-level projects for additional infrastructure, natural gas, E85 infrastructure, and including electric charging infrastructure. So we have about 5 projects that we have awarded now that deal with that address the issue of putting infrastructure in place to meet this initial rollout in California. And indeed, what we have now with these initial projects is we have funding for EV infrastructure in most major metropolitan areas throughout California. So Sacramento, Bay Area, LA, and the San Diego area. So we're poised at this point to at least accommodate the initial rollout of vehicles. What needs to happen now, and what the Energy Commission will be working with these awardees, is to ensure that these projects, as they unfold and as this infrastructure is put in place, that it truly is located strategically to meet the initial rollout, and that it ensures that electrical reliability will not be compromised as we put this infrastructure in place. We also are expanding our ongoing strategic planning efforts on a statewide basis, so that in making future investments in electric infrastructure, as more and more vehicles, the number of vehicles and the increased number of models of vehicles are introduced into the marketplace. In addition to our AB 118 program, we have a fairly significant research program at the Commission, and through that program we are also looking at initiatives dealing with EVs and EV plug-in electric vehicle infrastructure. We are taking a look at identifying and developing strategies for the second use or reuse of electric vehicle batteries for stationary applications. We have funded and we have recently renewed our funding for the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle and the battery electric research center out at UC Davis. And there will be a speaker, Mr. Turrentine, later, who will provide you more details on that effort. And then we are looking into the relationship between plug-in electric vehicles and the benefits to the grid. Looking forward also, we are thinking about the possibility of using CEC funding to examine a number of other issues more closely. Now, I'm sure as speakers come up later in the afternoon, they will provide even, probably a greater list of issues and certainly go into more detail. But some of the things that we are looking at and we have learned from stakeholders and through workshops is the length of permitting for EV charging is currently, it's erratic and typically too long. There's a lack of consumer awareness regarding the availability of EV charging, for example, for homes. People don't know if their homes are equipped or suited for electric charging, so we're looking into setting up a program that would provide that sort of information. There is the issue of public charging and home charging. Certainly we want to encourage home charging as much as possible. That's where you get the benefits of off-peak charging. But there's also going to have to be public charging opportunities to alleviate what has come to be known as the range anxiety. So customers, when they drive their Leafs or other similar vehicles that have a somewhat limited range, they can be assured that there are public charging opportunities available to them. We're also looking at co-locating renewable energy with electric charging sites. So in those opportunities where you place public charging sites, can we marry that with, say, for example, photovoltaic applications to offset some of the electricity that might be used during peak hours to charge electric vehicles? An interesting evolution over the last couple of years has been this notion of property assessed financing. currently available only to energy efficiency projects and renewable energy projects, but it does create an interesting opportunity that warrants further examination. Can we think about how we can use this process, this authority, to encourage home charging, for example, or charging at privately owned facilities? Battery second use and reuse, as I mentioned, is an important topic we want to consider, as also looking at alternative sources for raw materials for batteries. Lithium is obviously seems to be the raw material of choice going forward in advanced batteries for energy density and range, but lithium also brings with it certain geopolitical considerations and environmental considerations as to how it is extracted and produced in foreign countries. And so we think there are opportunities actually here, even within California, to produce lithium in-state and develop our own industry within state to accommodate the use of these EVs. And, with that, I will close my comments and take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Nancy Ryan, Commissioner from the California PUC. Welcome.
Thank you. Make this go away. Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to testify at today's hearing on behalf of the California Public Utilities Commission. The PUC is excited to be part of an active dialogue with the Air Resources Board and the Energy Commission, the legislature, other state and local agencies, and industry to pave the way for significant increases in electric vehicle usage in the coming years. Electric vehicles present a major opportunity to save energy, cut greenhouse gas emissions, improve air quality, reduce petroleum dependence, and save customers money. The transportation sector alone accounts for over half of the energy consumed in California and generates 38% of the state's greenhouse gas emissions. According to a recent study conducted by the Electric Power Research Institute and the Natural Resources Defense Council, the widespread adoption of plug-in hybrid electric vehicles could result in annual greenhouse gas reductions of over 400 million metric tons nationwide by 2050. That's equal to about a quarter of all the greenhouse gas emissions from the U.S. transportation sector in 2008. The same study projects electric vehicles could result in significant reductions in particulate matter emissions in California and improvements in visibility in Southern California. Now, electric vehicles have been around at least since the days of Thomas Edison. However, today we are seeing a new renaissance of electric transportation, and California is leading the way, and this was very evident in the presentations of my predecessors this afternoon. Last March, when President Obama announced important federal commitments to electric transportation, he chose Southern California Edison's Electric Vehicle Technical Center in Pomona as a setting for his announcement. And I'm very pleased to say that I toured that facility recently and had the chance to stand exactly where President Obama stood when he made his remarks to the media. Last week's announcement that Palo Alto-based Tesla Motors has partnered with Toyota to build electric vehicles in the NUMMI plant in Fremont is a further indication that California is becoming a hub of electric vehicle investment. The state is also the home of leading charging service providers such as Better Place and Coulomb Technologies. Similarly, our California utilities are recognized national leaders in electric transportation. Turning now to the CPUC's role, let me turn now to the CPUC's role. While electric vehicles are referred to as zero-emission vehicles, of course, that's not true in the broadest sense. Instead of emitting tailpipe emissions, electric vehicles contribute to power plant emissions. Fortunately, in California, we have an electric system that is relatively clean and getting cleaner. Increased electric vehicle use will require more electricity production and will also place new demands on the state's distribution and transmission system. However, electric vehicle usage can benefit all ratepayers, for example, by helping to better integrate renewable energy. Electric vehicles' reliance on the electricity system presents a number of important challenges that the CPUC is addressing. In May of last year, the PUC's Policy and Planning Division issued a white paper examining potential barriers and opportunities for light-duty vehicle electrification in the state. The white paper drew upon extensive stakeholder input to identify what the California utilities need to do to prepare for the introduction of electric vehicles. The white paper recommended that the Commission open a rulemaking to consider measures to reduce barriers to electrification. Then, in August of 2009, the PUC launched a new electric vehicle rulemaking. Through the rulemaking, the Commission seeks to ensure that the electric grid is ready for electric vehicles. We are considering infrastructure, rates, and policies to support these new vehicles. The rulemaking is also addressing the requirements of Senate Bill 626 by Senator Kehoe, which was signed into law last year. SB 626 requires the CPUC to evaluate policies and set the rules necessary to provide fueling infrastructure for plug-in hybrid and battery electric vehicles. In theory, there is more than enough excess electric generation, transmission, and distribution capacity to support millions of electric vehicles. One recent study found that the nation's existing electricity infrastructure has sufficient available capacity to fuel 84% of the nation's cars, pickup trucks, and SUVs on electricity. The reason for all that excess capacity is that the grid is built to meet peak demand, even though much of the time demand is only 1/2 to 1/3 of that peak. However, the reality is more challenging than these statistics suggest. Much of the excess capacity is available in the middle of the night. What if a car owner needs to charge his or her vehicle in the middle of the day? We will need to develop incentives to encourage electric vehicle owners to charge their times at times when electricity is not at peak demand, and we'll need to make some upgrades to the network to address situations where the vehicles must be charged at peak time. The utilities have also made us aware of challenges they expect at the local level. What if certain parts of the electric grid see a large concentration of vehicles? Will the local wires and transformers be adequate? When the Toyota Prius was first introduced, certain neighborhoods purchased the cars in much higher concentration than the rest of the state. And anecdotally, my little street in Berkeley has 4 hybrid vehicles on it. It's a 1-block street, and it's not even the high-rent district. The high-rent district of Berkeley. We anticipate that the much higher rent districts in Berkeley than the street that I live on, I can tell you. Anyway, we anticipate that the same patterns will occur with plug-in electric vehicles. Those high-concentration neighborhoods will probably need upgrades to their distribution network before many cars can be plugged in. To prevent any negative impacts on the grid, the PUC is examining policies to encourage vehicle owners to charge off-peak. For example, in the 1990s, during the last period of interest in electric vehicles, the PUC adopted time of use rates for the 3 large investor-owned utilities. Time of use rates charge a customer more for charging in the day and less at night, thus discouraging charging in the day when the grid is strained. In our current rulemaking, we are reviewing those rates and will make changes as needed. We are also examining what is sometimes referred to as smart charging, which would allow the car owner to allow the utility or charging provider to stop and start vehicle charging based on the state of the electric grid. For example, vehicles could charge when wind farms are producing power, then stop when the wind dies down. Fortunately, the California Independent System Operator operates wholesale energy markets that are well suited to communicate the condition of the grid through wholesale energy prices, enabling the type of smart charging, making it possible for that kind of smart charging to occur in the near term. Further, in the future, we could see electric vehicles discharging energy to the grid at certain times. In other words, electric vehicles can become a form of energy storage for the grid and could be used as an additional source of power at peak times. We are also investigating cost issues. If investments are made in the grid to support electric vehicles, who pays? Again, electric rates can be designed to ensure that customers pay for their fair share of distribution and transmission infrastructure costs. For example, demand charges may be appropriate to allocate costs and discourage charging that impacts the transmission and distribution system. Demand charges are based on your maximum usage at any given point in time, and thus reflect the demand a customer places on the system that delivers energy. This is in contrast to energy charges that reflect the total amount of energy that you use. The PUC is working with the Air Resources Board and the Energy Commission to ensure that there is sufficient charging infrastructure to support electric vehicles. This past March, the PUC, ARB, and the CEC held a joint workshop to identify ways to accelerate the installation of home charging equipment. Anecdotally, we have heard, and I think Mr. Smith indicated this, that it takes 30 to 45 days for a homeowner to get charging equipment installed. The equipment is not difficult to install, but the delay arises in the handoff of responsibility from one participant of the process to another. There are many more entities involved in purchasing an electric vehicle than gasoline-powered cars. Not only does the new electric vehicle customer need to negotiate with the manufacturer or the dealer, but before he or she takes the car home, the customer must work with someone to install the charging equipment in his or her home, work with the local utility, and work with the local government permitting and inspection officials. Can't just drive it off the lot. and expect to drive it again. At the workshop, we learned about a number of successful local efforts to streamline the process, but more work still needs to be done. The PUC is also looking at policies related to commercial charging stations, or charge spots. The Energy Commission has announced funding from the AB 118 Alternative and Renewable Vehicle Fuel and Technology Program for charging infrastructure projects throughout the state. You heard about those from Mr. Smith. The PUC will be working collaboratively with the CEC and utilities to regulate and the utilities we regulate to support public and commercial charging infrastructure network in the near term. One question that was raised early in our rulemaking is whether providers of charging services are electric utilities under the Public Utilities Code. We are aware of a number of non-utility companies that are beginning to invest in charge spots. Potential investors in charging infrastructure and utilities asked the PUC to address this important question before they move forward with these important investments. Last Friday, the PUC released a proposed decision on this question. The proposed decision reviews law and past precedent, especially in the area of compressed natural gas, and concludes that electric charging providers are not utilities. The decision notes that public utility regulation is not needed since vehicle fueling is not a natural monopoly. We believe that through our jurisdiction to set transmission, distribution, and generation rates, we can create incentives to manage grid impacts. The decision also states that the PUC will investigate whether there are any health and safety concerns related to charging that should be addressed through utility interconnection policies or legislative action. The decision is now going through the public comment period, and the full PUC could act on the decision as early as late June. The PUC also wants to ensure that lower-income communities have access to charge spots. If automakers introduce vehicles that are accessible to lower-income purchasers, the infrastructure needs to be there to support charging of these vehicles. Thank you again for inviting me to testify today, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And I would like to welcome other colleagues who came in, Assembly Members Zolodio, Buchanan, I think that's Mr. Knight down there, Mr. Fong, Ms. Skinner, Mr. Nilo is here and coming back, and Mr. Berryhill. So the first question would be Ms. Skinner.
Yes, I can direct this question to all of you. Given the long-range goals the state has for electric vehicles, might it make sense, and the chart, I think it was the Energy Commission representative put on, that showed what number of vehicles we would need to have, electric vehicles, that we would need to have by 2050 to meet the state's GHG reduction goals, assuming, of course, that our or I shouldn't say electric vehicles, it was a range of them, but of course that would assume that the electricity was little to no emissions. But the real question I'm asking, the point I'm making is that rather than trying to anticipate where charging stations are necessary, given that a charge, I mean, it's not like a standard fueling. If you go to a gas station, you can fuel, depending on the size of your tank, in a relatively short period of time. Even with the supercharge, you still need 20 minutes minimum and up towards to a half hour. Most people don't want to, in the midst of their driving, stop for a 20-minute half hour, and clearly no one's going to stop for the 8 hours or whatever. Now, obviously, if the vehicle's used for a commute trip, it can be in a location and be there potentially for 8 hours, or if it's at home. Now, many people don't have garages. And so trying to just solve this through a garage type of situation may not make sense, and trying to anticipate where exactly fuel's charging. So what about, in anticipation of this, trying to standardize the battery so that one pulls into a fuel station, and rather than taking the gasoline and putting in the nozzle, instead you just exchange your battery, so that then in effect that's the same as fueling, because now you're charged and you can go off. Has there been consideration of that? I know clearly manufacturers, but has there been consideration of something like that, which would be somewhat analogous to what we do now with the common fuels?
Well, I think you have a speaker from Better Place later in the agenda, and that is one of the approaches that they're trying to commercialize. And of course, ultimately, I think it will depend on whether the auto manufacturers are willing to standardize on a given battery, but or multiple batteries. But yeah, that's being looked at very carefully, and I believe there's a demonstration program underway or starting very soon.
Well, the point of my question is, I mean, certainly we don't want to in any way stifle innovation in these vehicles, and yet if we leave it solely and only to the marketplace, we could have a situation where every single type of vehicle or even model has a different battery. Whereas if it's conceivable that this is a mechanism that might work, we could anticipate some number of years out, and through our regs in the same way that we now require unleaded gasoline or any variety of other things, that
Ms.
we
Skinner?
would anticipate that kind of manufacturing of the vehicles.
Ms. Skinner, what I was going to say is some of those questions will be answered rather in the following panels. So
I'm asking this in terms of a regulatory or...
Well, I think the issue is still, very open. On electric vehicles, the principal place of charging is at home, and we want to encourage that because of the excess electricity that's available at night, both low cost and excess capacity. So that's the first choice. Then the next question becomes, how do you extend the use of these vehicles that are inherently limited range and take quite a while to charge? And probably the next place would be at work, so that people that have relatively long commutes, like many, especially in Southern California, have, could get a charge during the day, because there's excess capacity in the morning, for example, and as well as at night. And then finally, the question is, what do you do with these fast charges, and how often will they be used? And one of the things that may guide us on that as to whether chargers do that or whether battery swapping does that is I think it's federal government and the Energy Commission sponsoring with Nissan this study in San Diego, where there'll be a lot of public infrastructure installed for the purpose of finding out what do people use and want. Are they completely happy with just going home, where it'll be cheaper and a little bit more convenient and faster because they can let it sit all night, or do they really want this convenience charging available? And then finally, of course, you could extend like I said, get from LA to San Diego. You may want to take an electric vehicle, and you're willing to stop and look at the ocean for 30 minutes while you're getting charged. And there's other opportunities too. This is kind of an anecdotal one, but the fact is that if you go through a drive-in window at McDonald's versus go inside, you spend more money if you go inside. So if you had a charger at a business like that draws you to go inside, the company might make more money by offering rapid charging for you. So there's all kinds of opportunities that are probably unanticipated that may play out. I think the biggest challenge on the battery swap is just going to be the standardization of the battery and whether it's worth it to the people to pay the money to maintain that kind of a service.
Commissioner Ryan, I had a question as it relates to rules or imposing rules on IOUs as it relates to electric vehicle charging stations. Does the PUC have any plans for that currently? And are there current tariffs already in place for IOUs and infrastructure charging facilities?
There are tariffs in place, but I think they're really geared more towards the sort of earlier generation of electric vehicles, so they would be more geared towards home charging. One of the issues that we'll be looking at in the next phase of the proceeding that I'm overseeing is what kinds of tariffs we need to develop for, I think, the broader range of charging activities that we expect to happen as the market grows and expands. So we will be looking at that question in more depth.
So would an individual who's on fixed income or a senior be expected to absorb these charges even though they might never even own or even ride an electric vehicle and definitely not have a charging facility at their home? Will they be expected to absorb those costs on their bill?
I think there's a couple of questions in here. I mean, the first sort of embedded in the question of rates. The first one is just, do we put rates in place that create the right incentives for customers in terms of when they charge, so they impose the least costs on the system, and that's what the time of use rates do, and I think we'll be looking at how we expand those for other types of charging stations. The second question touches on an issue that is a very important issue to address in the context of electric vehicles, which is how do the transmission and distribution upgrades that are necessary get paid for throughout the system. I talked about demand charges in my testimony, and I would expect, particularly for new commercial charge spots, that we would look to do with them as we do with other types of large commercial and industrial customers, where they pay a demand charge that reflects the burden that they place on the system in terms of how the system has to be sized to be able to accommodate them. It's a bigger challenge in the context of residential customers. However, it's important to note that low-income customers in California are protected by the CARE program and by the tiered rate structure, which in effect means that costs of new mandates are not spread to those customers at present.
Have you looked at a separate in-home charge for individuals who have charging meters at their home and allow them to pay for it directly?
Well, that's what I mean. Currently, we have a charging rate.
Yeah, but
so you have a separate meter.
Okay, all right.
There's a separate meter for the vehicle, and it pays its own rate, and that's
I understanding that, but I mean above and beyond that meter charge, the infrastructure upgrade charge. Case in point, if I were to upgrade my home and I go from 100 amp to a 200 amp,
right,
despite my service feed might be 100 feet or down the road, I'm responsible for that infrastructure improvement, even though it belongs to the utility once it's in the street.
Right.
Would a homeowner be expected to absorb that cost as well?
That's an example of the questions that we will be looking at.
Okay. Right.
Just to elaborate, what if the first two vehicle purchasers on the street, sort of fit within the existing infrastructure size, and then a third person on the street buys a vehicle? Then do we go back to the first two people and put that cost on them? How do we spread it around and do it in an equitable way? But those are core questions that we are examining.
We have several more questions for these regulators, but we have a whole afternoon of panel and questions. So I would ask my colleagues to keep their questions short. And with that, Ms. Buchanan.
I'll keep mine very short. It's just a rhetorical question. We have a gas tax and now an excise tax that we use to maintain our roads, and we know that since the gas tax hasn't been increased in almost 2 decades, and our cars have become more efficient, we actually have, and same thing, and there's not been any inflation factor added, that we actually have fewer dollars per vehicle mile traveled to maintain our roads, which is creating a significant infrastructure problem in California. When we have electric vehicles, if 20 years from now we had all electric vehicles and had no gas tax or excise tax, how would you propose, through rating structures or whatever, that we fund the maintenance of our highways?
Would you like an answer to your
Well, if you have an answer, it's
question?
just, or you can, it's something to think about. But
Yeah.
I do think that as we make that transition, we still are going to have a need to maintain our roads, and I don't know what the vehicle for that is going to be, but it's something that has to be part of the thought process.
I agree completely, and I'll just note a couple of things that might be appropriate vehicles. The first, of course, is that there is a proposal that the Air Board is considering under AB 32 to implement a cap-and-trade program, which would generate revenue. Some of that revenue would come from allowances purchased by electricity generators. So, in effect, that's a pool of revenue that could be used to finance roads.
But theoretically, cap-and-trade eventually goes away. So in terms of being a long-term solution, may or may not be, right?
In the School of Economic Theory I come from, cap-and-trade would not go away eventually.
Right.
There would always be a need to have a price on carbon because there would always be some carbon content in the fuel.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure I would agree that it would go away. The other thing I would point out is that
Could be a diminishing, though, funds. So
as carbon emissions go down.
That's exactly right. But anyway.
Another good one for you to think about is pay-as-you-drive auto insurance, a proposal that's been around for a long time. And I think, from speaking again as an economist, a great idea. The more you drive, the more you pay.
And would it be part of your insurance, or would it be part of, if we have how many people that don't drive, that don't have insurance at all, that at least if they put gas in, pay for the roads.
So I think that the idea is that you pay it at the pump,
Right.
whatever the pump is for your vehicle.
Okay, thank you.
I have a brief question. The recent adoption of the ZEV mandate has been criticized by environmental organizations, and this is for Mr. Coquette, for not setting the level high enough to spur the introduction of electric vehicles. So now that the Obama administration has indicated support for electric vehicles, is there any sense of revisiting that?
Yes, we are revisiting it actually right now, and will be over the next 6 months or so. And the idea is to try to figure out what regulatory push will get us through the so-called valley of death for new technologies and get it to the point where they can be a sustainable commercial product and take off on their own. And so that's what we're trying to do. Some of these technologies just have a very difficult time, as all of these infrastructure issues are barriers to prevent their success and need to be knocked down and removed in order to give them a chance to get into the marketplace and compete with petroleum fuel vehicles.
So it's in flux, you could say.
Yeah, it's in flux, but we understand very clearly that it's an essential decision along the pathway to get these vehicles out in their greater numbers.
Thank you. Thank you very much to this panel. And I'd like to ask the next panel to come up and introduce yourselves, the electric vehicle manufacturers. Welcome. We're happy that you're here. Mr. Augustine?
I'm John Cabanis. I'm going to
Mr.
go first, if that's all right.
Yes, it is.
Thank you also for inviting us to be here today. It's a very important topic for all of us on the auto side as well. Good afternoon again. My name is John Cabanis. I'm Director of Environment and Energy for the Association of International Automobile Manufacturers. And with me today is my colleague, Kurt Augustine, who is the Director of State Relations here in California for the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers. Together, AIM and the Alliance represent nearly 100%, our members represent nearly 100% of the vehicles sold here in California. Of course, there are some small manufacturers, including Tesla, for instance, that are not a member right now, but maybe that'll change in the future. First, I will spend just a few minutes providing some background and status on electric vehicles and other advanced ZEV technologies that auto manufacturers are developing in California and around the world, in fact. Then Mr. Augustine will provide a summary of some of the key infrastructure issues and that we believe are impeding the wide-scale penetration of electric vehicles, electric drive vehicles, I should say, and our recommendations for addressing these issues. AIM and the Alliance members are engaged in research and development in a wide range of advanced ZEV-type vehicle technologies, including, as Mr. Coquette described, hybrid electric vehicles, which you're all very familiar with, I'm sure, the plug-in hybrids, which are new, battery electric vehicles, which have been around in various forms for many years, but new developments, of course, now, but also other technologies that are near zero emission technologies, as Mr. Coquette mentioned, compressed natural gas vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles, as well as advanced clean diesel and advanced gasoline combustion engines. And again, as Mr. Coquette described very aptly, these efforts have been going on for the last 20 years as California has had the ZEV program in place for that period of time. The California Zero Emission Vehicle Program, which does date back to 1990, the early focus was on battery electric vehicles, and some of you may recall in the 90s when we had demonstration programs for various types of electric vehicles here in California. However, due in part to the slow pace, I guess you'd say, of battery innovation and development, the program has been modified several times over the years to address these challenges. Currently, most of the requirements of the ZEV program are met through the sale of what's called partial zero-emission vehicles, or PZEVs, and even that category has several types. For instance, extremely clean conventional vehicles with reduced evaporative emissions, so they have no real electric vehicle component, are still can be classified as partial zero-emission vehicles because they're near zero. And then there's categories of advanced technology PZEVs, such as hybrids and the CNG vehicles, and even some methanol fuel cell vehicles qualify in this category. And then there's the enhanced AT, or advanced technology PZEV classification, which includes the electricity or hydrogen, partial at least of those vehicles, such as the plug-in hybrid, best example now being the Chevy Volt that'll be out soon. And even hydrogen internal combustion engines qualify under this category. Electric drive vehicles remain, of course, as the cornerstone of the ZEV program, and this includes, again, the battery electrics, the hydrogen fuel cell electrics, the plug-in hybrids as well. The widespread deployment of battery electric vehicles, of course, is still limited by battery technology. Lithium-based batteries are currently the most promising technology, but the Chevy Volt plug-in hybrid and the Nissan Leaf all-electric vehicle are designed to use these lithium batteries. However, there's still issues associated with durability and cost and so on that need to be addressed. And this again gets back to the issue that Mr. Cricket mentioned about having adequate range. It's been just over 10 years ago when hybrid vehicles were first introduced here in the United States by first Honda, but then closely followed by Toyota. Honda's Insight model was the first hybrid sold here in the U.S. It was closely followed by another Honda model, the Civic Hybrid. Then Toyota was on the scene quickly with its HEV program, and they have really emphasized their hybrid electric vehicle classification. The very successful Prius, now in its third generation, I'm sure everyone's familiar with it. It's sort of the icon for the hybrid electric. And then they have hybrid versions of several other Toyota and Lexus models. Toyota has now surpassed, I believe, 1 million hybrid vehicles sold worldwide. These and many other auto manufacturers currently offer hybrid EVs and other advanced ZEV-type technology vehicles. I've included a list here for you, which I took from the EPA and DOT fueleconomy.gov website. However, I made one omission. I should have included here the Chevy Volt plug-in, which inadvertently did not list. But you see here there's 18 different hybrid models that are offered for sale today. And then there's the Chevy Volt plug-in hybrid. There's the Honda Clarity fuel cell electric vehicle, and the Honda Civic compressed natural gas vehicle, and of course the Nissan Leaf all-electric vehicle, which will be again on sale soon. By all measures, I think we all would agree that the introduction of hybrid vehicles has been a success, but it is limited. With over 10 years in the market, hybrid sales today are only about 2% of the U.S. market. And even here in California, hybrid vehicles are only about 6% of the market. And that's after 10 years. Absent significant gasoline price signals, the adoption of these kinds of technologies that greatly reduce petroleum consumption face a significant challenge. This experience with the penetration of hybrid vehicles underscores the nature of the automotive marketplace. Under business as usual circumstances, it takes many years for new advanced technologies to penetrate the market. To achieve the environmental results needed to address today's environmental goals, we need much faster penetration of these advanced technologies, as Mr. Coquette described. The California Air Resources Board is projecting about a 20 to 25% penetration of ZEV and other advanced type technologies for new vehicle sales by 2025 as being the target. To achieve this kind of penetration target, the marketing effort cannot be approached as business as usual. To succeed, we must address both the supply and demand for these vehicles, and consumers must be part of the solution. We need to educate consumers and emphasize their role and options, and work together to create as many incentives as possible to increase consumer demand for and use of these vehicles, and possibly even some disincentives for conventional technologies. In addition, stakeholders must work collaboratively to overcome any infrastructure impediments to introducing these vehicles. As I mentioned at the outset, my colleague from the Alliance will identify and describe those in more detail. It is important to note that along with the advanced technologies, we need to have these sustainable supplies of quality fuels to support them, again, as Mr. Coquette aptly mentioned. In some cases, adequate and properly priced fuels are part of the infrastructure issues we face. And eventually, we need these non-carbon sources of electricity and hydrogen. Finally, the federal government, both the EPA and the Department of Transportation, are engaged in a national program now for greenhouse gas and fuel economy standards supported by California. EPA and DOT just finalized standards for 2012 to 2016, which parallel California's greenhouse vehicle standards. We appreciate CARB's cooperation and close collaboration in developing and aligning with the national program, which will help to make it a success. And just last week, the White House hosted another national stakeholder meeting to commemorate last year's historic agreement to forge this first step for 2012 to 16, and announced a new commitment now for the next step, the 2017 to 2025 program, and also a program for addressing greenhouse gases and fuel economy for medium and heavy-duty vehicles. These additional standards will present new challenges and some opportunities too, but put even greater pressure on these new advanced technologies and fuels now for all types of vehicles. And we look forward to working with EPA, DOT, and of course California in establishing this next round of standards and working closely together to advance these technologies accordingly, as well as addressing the fuels and infrastructure issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I believe Senator Padilla wanted to make a comment. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mr. and Madam Chair, for allowing me to sit in for a few minutes on this hearing and to participate for a few minutes. First, I apologize I'm late. We just wrapped up Senate floor session a few minutes ago, but I wanted to chime in out of significant interest here. In fact, the Senate Energy, Utility, and Communications Committee was scheduled just a couple of weeks ago to have a very similar informational hearing and discussion. And we weren't quite as forward-thinking as the Assembly, apparently. We put ours off for a couple of months so that we can restructure our hearing in conjunction with the Senate Transportation Committee to ask a lot of the same questions and hear from a lot of the same folks and delve into a lot of the same issues. So that's not what pressed me to come here and speak on an urgent basis, but let me tell you what did. I apologize I missed the opportunity to hear and ask questions of the first panel. I understand you had somebody from the ARB, somebody from the Energy Commission, and somebody from the PUC. And to just sort of cut to the chase here a little bit, there was two things happening at the Energy Commission that kind of confused me. And many of you are probably aware of how closely we're watching the Energy Commission and their activities these days in the context of this discussion about charging stations, part of the critical infrastructure. If our electric vehicles or full electrics or even partial electrics are going to really take off and we're going to see the benefits that we're hoping to see, that charging infrastructure is an important piece of all of that. And I couldn't help but go back to AB 118 and the Energy Commission's draft investment plan that AB 118 calls for. I'm sure many of you have it or have reviewed it, but in that plan, we see an acknowledgement from the Energy Commission that, and I'll quote from page 27 of it, given all the complex issues involved with the electric drive infrastructure, it would be helpful to establish a statewide strategic plan to address the anticipated need for single dwelling and multi-unit recharging, as well as public charging stations and charge points. The Energy Commission is evaluating its role in the development of such a comprehensive plan for electric drive vehicles. Sounds good, sounds responsible, sounds like an appropriate way to proceed. However, the Energy Commission followed the release of the plan with a notice of proposed awards just 1 week ago that funds public charging facilities to the tune of several $1 million. I'm looking at a table that has total amounts somewhere in the $4 million range roughly. So I just couldn't help but ask the question, how is it that on the one hand they're acknowledging part of moving forward is the need for a comprehensive and strategic plan recognizing the complexities of the issues, yet very soon thereafter, without such a plan in place, there's movement towards several $1 million going out the door without the plan, without the specs, and certainly without the input I think they would acknowledge they need from the PUC and others to maximize the effectiveness of these new technology vehicles. So in the coming weeks and months, I would love to work together with these two committees to ask the questions of the Energy Commission on what sort of analysis, if any, they've done to determine how many charging facilities are needed in the state of California and where and when. It would seem to me these are some basic questions to ask before we start sending millions of dollars out the door. Is there a plan for distribution of the sites that has been funded, and how does it match with expected sales of electric vehicles? If each of the charging sites were used at the same time, what would the likely kilowatt hour impact be, not just from a cost standpoint, but from a grid impact standpoint? That's where the utilities part of these hearings, I think, do have some red flags that we're seeing. It's my understanding, I think the understanding of most legislators, that to maximize the benefits of electric vehicles and hybrid electric vehicles, it's this concept that we sold to folks that you can plug your car in overnight and it's charging up when power is cheap. But these public charging stations, if we're doing them in shopping centers or workplaces, it would seem to me that it's pretty attractive to want to plug in during the day when we're at our peak and arguably power is at its most costly. And by the way, if you plug in at a public place, is that power free, or is the person who drives the vehicle, owns the vehicle, plugging it in, paying for it at some point? Basic questions that I think need to be a little bit further discussed and addressed before we start sending millions of dollars out the door. So clearly we look to the Energy Commission for recommendations on a lot of this, but we also hope to get the input from the PUC, from utilities, from other stakeholders so that we can devise the best policies possible. And I'll just close by acknowledging page 24 of the plan document that states the Energy Commission will examine these issues more closely as it considers funding for charging infrastructure. So I hope they're not just examining these issues more closely, but fleshing them out and doing so with sufficient public input before the money goes out the door. Thank you.
Senator, thank you so much for coming over. Happy we're going to be working together. I'm glad the Assembly got on it first. But we will be equal partners, and we are considering another hearing in Southern California. We will definitely let you know and include your concerns and questions and hopefully invite your participation. Thanks so much. And we will continue to the next speaker.
Hello, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, and members. My name is Kurt Augustine. I'm the Director of Policy and Government Affairs for the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers, and we thank you for the opportunity to continue our story about how the automobile industry is meeting the electric vehicle mandates nationally and here in California. The auto industry has enthusiastically joined with the President and the Air Resources Board in the agreement that was signed with the President last summer. And we share the goals of fuel efficiencies and greenhouse gas reductions. And some of the ways we're doing that in the electric vehicles, John has mentioned, but I also want to specifically highlight some of the electric vehicles that are now on the road or soon to be on the road. For instance, BMW has 3 vehicles. They have a Mini E that has been on the road in Southern California since June of last year. There are about 250 vehicles down there, and it's provided a real extensive on-road experience on how these vehicles are working, as well as how consumers themselves are using it. They also, next year, will have a vehicle called Active E, which is based on their their Series 1 vehicle that's due in summer of 2011, and one of its target market areas is Southern California. And they will also have a all-new vehicle called a Mega City that has a radical new design using fiber technologies. Will be out in 2013. Ford just today announced that they are making a $135 million investment for 5 new electric vehicles, 3 of which are coming online very quickly. The Transit Connect van will be out this year. The Focus vehicle will be out next year, and a plug-in hybrid in 2012. Volkswagen has announced in 2013 they'll have 3 vehicles, the e-Golf, the Jetta, and a new car called the Up Mini car. Chrysler has announced that it will be selling the Fiat 500, an electrified version, in 2012. A car that will have the Fiat nameplate will be made here in the United States. And finally, Mitsubishi has a vehicle called the i-MiEV, which is an electric vehicle being sold in Japan now and be sold here in the United States in the coming year, and is actually out on the steps of the Capitol, on the East Steps, that you're welcome after the hearing to go visit. It is a 4-passenger vehicle that is a decent-sized vehicle for 4 adults, and again, it's a vehicle that's being on the road today in Japan. Now, having ended that little commercial, I'll get into the aspect of what we're really here to talk about, and that's really that our nation needs mass market commercialization of advanced electric technologies, and so we can end our dependence on foreign oil and cut down on greenhouse gases. Meeting this goal will be only possible through careful placement of advanced powertrain technologies, incorporating many of the designs we talked about: electric, hybrid, plug-in hybrid, battery electric, and fuel cell. Now, achieving widespread acceptance of these technologies requires 4 efforts. We must develop a supporting infrastructure, provide incentives for consumer adoption, align regulatory options, and remove other market barriers. We in the auto industry, both the Alliance and AIM, see 5 challenges to achieving those 4 goals. The first is we must avoid creating regulatory barriers to electric vehicle adoption. Secondly, we have new technologies require new safety standards. We need to establish an infrastructure for electronic vehicles charging sufficient for consumer needs. We must address the high cost of the near-term cost of batteries, and we must encourage consumer acceptance of these vehicles. Now, I was glad to hear both Mr. Caquette and Mr. Smith, regulars, sharing some of these concerns. And we talk about the first one, avoiding regulatory barriers that prohibit vehicle adoption. Unfortunately, I'll start my remarks off with a bit of a negative aspect. Current policy requires manufacturers of automobiles to account for the upstream emissions of electricity generation. This means that we're responsible for the emissions of utilities to become operative on our vehicles. We believe this discourages future production of electric vehicles by making automobile manufacturers responsible for the electric mix of the country or the state. We cannot, as automakers, control fuel production, including electricity or any other fuel, and we have never been responsible for the emissions of the producers of fuel, and we see that as inconsistent with a desire to get more electric vehicles out. Upstream emissions will increase compliance burdens, create planning uncertainty, and put large-scale investments at risk, all hampering the launch of electric mobility. So we're encouraging that we work with all of our regulators, both on the federal level and the state level, so that we can create a policy that allows a faster use of vehicles on the road and to eliminate or at least modify the upstream concerns that we have that we cannot control. The second challenge we have are these new technologies require new safety standards. Lithium cells and batteries have issues on transportation and in traffic emergencies. So we ask that any policy done by the state of California be consistent with the guidelines already presented by the United Nations. And we support programs to develop uniform protocols and educate first responders, emergency personnel, vehicle service technicians, and the public about the safety concerns after a crash involving an electric vehicle or the vehicle in repair. And we certainly strongly support some of the previous recommendations about developing a workforce, both at our car dealers and at the actual car manufacturers. Our third challenge is establishing an infrastructure for electric vehicles sufficient for consumer needs. And we have 3 recommendations about that. We need to facilitate charging infrastructure installation at home and the workplace, encourage investment in publicly accessible EV charging stations, and continue to promote a seamless national charging infrastructure through adoption of uniform standards and test protocols. Now, we have many recommendations that are on this topic that are in the report that I've handed to you, both from a federal and state perspective, so I won't go through all of them. But several of the things that we think are important are that we must continue to encourage the installation of EV charging equipment with a smarter grid. We share the concerns that have been expressed earlier about load and what the Senator had and the regulators. We need to promote investment by utilities, homeowners, and others in electric vehicle charging infrastructure, either through measures as tax incentives, tax deductions, or other incentives to promote infrastructure development. We also encourage the development of publicly accessible fast charging stations to support the use of vehicles and should be considered at places like destination areas, like arenas and shopping centers. Some of the comments that were made earlier make a lot of sense in terms of if you're going to be somewhere for a few hours, if you're going to be at a basketball game or something, that'd be a terrific place to be able to power up your vehicle. We also want to work with both the federal regulators and the California PUC to establish consistent regulations that would allow non-utility companies to recover their investment in these publicly accessible charging stations, whether that means pay per use, pay per minute, whatever. And then on another infrastructure question, we share Ms. Buchanan's concerns about how we are going to have an infrastructure for our roads. She's absolutely right. We eventually will be going away from a heavy dependence on oil, gasoline sales. So we're very concerned about that and do want to look into that into the future as a critical concern of infrastructure, not just the charging stations. Fourth challenge is the high cost of batteries. We think that we need to have established the incentives for automotive-grade batteries and stationary applications as part of grid modernization efforts by using grid modernization funding both on a federal and state level. We also want to encourage the expansion of government funding by purchases, such as the Department of Energy's Clean Cities program, and also state and local fleet programs. We also want to explore options for final applications for automotive-grade batteries at the end of useful life in the vehicle. A terrific example used by General Motors is the fact their batteries in their Volt, when they reach the end of life for an automobile, are still perfectly valuable batteries, and they're using them and plan to use them in hospitals for emergency backup generation. So these batteries go under a tremendous amount of strain as a vehicle, but have a lot of life left over. And so those are the type of things that we can look downstream, be able to help reduce, and knowing there's a marketplace for those, that will help reduce some of the upfront costs and make the cars more available at a cost more competitively for our consumers. And finally, we want to encourage consumer acceptance. There's been several comments made about some of the issues there. It's one more thing we have to worry about is range anxiety. I already have enough of those type of issues, but I guess now we have to add one more. We do believe that it's important that we promote consumer awareness about the contribution that these type of vehicles make to promoting our national goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and energy security. We also want to support state and local efforts to provide non-monetary measures to incentivize these vehicles, subsidized parking, the HOV lane access, etc., that was mentioned earlier. It's also important that guidelines be established for vehicle labeling that are meaningful and understandable to consumers regarding fuel consumption for electric drive versus conventional vehicles. There's been a lot of debate as to how you're going to make that equivalent. People obviously make purchases based on how many miles per gallon their car gets currently. There is a lot of debate on how we make that conversion to a vehicle that's not really using gallons anymore. But so people can have a meaningful understanding of the efficiency of their vehicle. And finally, we need consumers to be educated on the types of vehicles available and the impact of their use, local climbing, driving, their climate, and provide education on things like warranties, battery life, end of life, how their impact on resale. That will help them because there's a lot of fear right now that people believe these vehicles will be their battery's dead and they're worthless and won't be able to have any money. And we've got to together to educate them on that. But it's an exciting format that the electric vehicles produce, and we're happy to be part of that and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your input. The last speaker on this panel, could you please introduce yourself?
Thank you. Even on the best day, it's a difficult name. It's Dermot O'Connell. I'm Vice President for Corporate Development with Tesla Motors. And I'd like to thank you all for inviting us here today. I'd like to thank you also for the leadership that the legislature and various other bodies out here in Sacramento have provided to the industry. It's not a coincidence that Tesla was born in this state, and we hope we'll continue to thrive here. It is exactly the sort of policies that are being discussed here today that are going to lead those developments. I think it's also notable on a personal level, when we first started visiting Sacramento 4 years ago, it was hard to have these conversations, and now we're, that is to say, to even talk about the possibilities for electric vehicles, because, as you would all know, there was an experience in the mid-'90s that came to a somewhat less successful conclusion than we're anticipating. And now we're talking about the barriers and issues that need to be overcome as though this were a presumed success. And I'll address that. A little bit about Tesla Motors. The company was born about 6 years ago, started by a couple of Silicon Valley engineers. The idea was to bring the idea of the introduction of disruptive technology to the automotive industry, an industry that had become somewhat moribund as far as innovation was concerned, with apologies to my colleagues, but not for bad reasons, if only because as a large business, as a capital-intensive business, it is natural to adopt a more status quo-oriented stance toward innovations. Innovations represent risk in some respects, which is why it's perfect for the Silicon Valley business model. The core idea was to develop an entirely new powertrain, starting with the battery, to move on to the motor and the power electronics and the controls and software systems. That is the core of our technology. That is the core of the powertrain. And then to, as quickly as possible, turn that into a successful business proposition. As we looked at a business model, we were quite naturally focused on the things that we're successful at doing, and that is introducing first-generation technology. It is often, unfortunately, expensive in its first couple of generations, and you will have no doubt heard of the Tesla Roadster, which is an admittedly expensive car. I hope you would also agree it's exciting, and most of our customers would agree it's a good value for money. But the way to think about the Tesla Roadster is it's effectively the $2,000 cell phone of 1984. You'll recall those phones. They were big and bulky, somewhat less amenable than a Roadster in its first generation. But we move forward to today. where cell phones are almost free, and we've already moved on to the next technology, which is in fact the smartphone. I think that this is a proven business model for technology innovation, and we intend to apply it as aggressively as possible to the automotive space. In terms of the practicalities of our business model, we are known for our first car, the Tesla Roadster. That is the strength upon which our brand has been built. However, less well known is the fact that we are selling powertrains to other automotive manufacturers. Tesla battery and charging technology is already in an EV version of the Smart, which is a product of Daimler-Benz in Europe. It will shortly be introduced here in the U.S. We are also cooperating with them on an A-class vehicle, a vehicle which is not on the road in the U.S., but will be in Europe and is anticipated to be brought here in the coming year. We announced last week that we would be engaging in similar activities with Toyota, and it's fair to say that we are having discussions with a number of the other OEMs, both U.S. and foreign manufacturers. And this is consistent with our mission, which I perhaps should have started with. But as we thought about how to attack this issue of how do we get to a real breakthrough in advanced technology vehicles, the mission was to, once we had settled on EV technology as the winning technology relative to other possibilities, ethanol, biodiesel, fuel cell, et cetera, was to catalyze the market in whatever way possible. First of all, by putting our own exciting products on the road, but second of all, by making sure that our powertrains went into the vehicles of the large-scale producers. And that's because as we develop our own vehicles, we're a little bit constrained in our ability to do everything that we would like to do as quickly as we would like to do it. The idea with the Roadster is to bring that vehicle out at a profitable price point on a unit basis, but to very quickly move down to higher volumes and lower price points. Our next vehicle, the Model S, scheduled for introduction in 2012, will debut at just under $50,000 after the federal tax credit. It will have much greater utility. The Roadster is a great car, but it is a two-seater. My kids complain about that all the time. The Model S will be a 5-seat plus 2 sedan. And thereafter, we would like to be introducing in the very near future a $30,000 vehicle in volumes of up to 100 to 200,000 units. So it's a very conscious effort on that side of the business to get to lower price points and much higher volumes. Higher volumes, in fact, lead to lower price points, and so that's why that's so important. But in the meantime, we have this OEM business where by selling powertrain technology to incumbent manufacturers who already have the economies of scale in manufacturing, we can deliver to the market much more accessible vehicles by our agency, if not under our brand. A little bit about progress to date. There are over 1,400 Roadsters on the road in the U.S. and Europe and a couple in Asia, I believe. We've logged over 4 million miles among those Roadsters. And what's worth recognizing is that because of the very tight feedback loops we have with our customers and through our distribution, every single one of those 4 million miles, customer permissions accepting, are logged and sent back to the company so that we can examine vehicle performance, optimize our technology, because iterating the technology is the other way that we're going to get to lower cost points. That is to say, manufacturing economies of scale and iterating this technology rapidly. A couple of the major barriers, the strategic barriers to the acceptance of this technology, the development of this technology, some of which have been addressed, are worth noting. It is, as I said, the automobile business, a very capital-intensive endeavor, and especially so for a small, capital-constrained company such as ourselves. We benefit from the venture capital business model, financing model in Silicon Valley, but frankly, that's a business model that isn't so well optimized for capital-intensive industries. We're not shooting software out onto the web and hoping that the world will come to us. We're actually investing in large-scale manufacturing operations and very expensive tooling and all of that. And access to low-cost capital, particularly given the crisis that we've all been through in the last 2 years, has been no small challenge. It's worth saying that we've benefited from the fact that through early discussions with the federal government, we've benefited from a DOE loan The Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Program has conveyed this loan to us, and that's allowing us to build 2 manufacturing facilities, one a powertrain manufacturing facility to produce our powertrains for supply to other OEMs. That's in Palo Alto. And then with the news last week, we've announced that we'll be building our second car, the Model S, in Fremont. Demand generation. I mentioned that much of the discussion around EVs right now comes frustratingly close to assuming that the success of EVs is an accomplished fact. The truth is that we're only on the cusp of the introduction of volumes of these vehicles. And while it is the responsibility of the manufacturer to develop a compelling commercial proposition, something that's exciting for the consumer to buy and a value for their money, we are confronting an entrenched incumbency in the oil and gas industry, which perhaps we don't rate on the radar screen right now, but it has to be considered that the costs in that business are reflected following almost a century of optimization and no small amount of regulatory protection. The conclusion I would draw you to is the fact that the most elegant solution from a pure economic model would probably be the implementation of a meaningful gas tax. It's true that we have gas tax in place, but it hasn't been adjusted for inflation, and it certainly doesn't reflect the actual cost, whether it's rated in climatic conditions, whether it's rated in oil security and the subsequent constraints on national security and foreign policy, or the transfers of wealth that we experience nationally. A gas tax is the most meaningful way to inspire, in a technology-neutral fashion, true growth in advanced technology vehicles. However, I recognize the difficulties politically in implementing it, but there are other devices. The income tax credit that operates at the federal level, some of the programs that you and your colleagues have inspired through the ARB, convey short-term, though transitory, benefits to consumers who are willing to adopt early technology. Those are important. But I would also commend to you the ZEV mandate. It has, over the course of time, while it served a very clear and focused purpose perhaps 15 years ago, it has been muddled through a number of iterations. I think most would agree with me, watered down significantly. And I would commend to everybody here some attention to the effort which will be taking place in the second half of this year that I would suggest should significantly increase the demand for just the kind of vehicles we're talking about here. And I'm not even specifically speaking or presuming electric vehicle technology. Raise the bar for the highest order level of pure ZEVs. Raise the demand for those, and you will see manufacturers adjust. There are several devices, whether it's strict compliance or whether it's, as my colleagues have mentioned, trading schemes whereby manufacturers who might not want to pursue the technology can buy credits generated by others who are willing to take on that risk. Tesla Motors currently benefits from this sort of trading. It helps us to get more of our vehicles into the market. It helps us to address the significant startup costs that we have, but ultimately it will lead to higher unit volumes at lower unit prices. Infrastructure, a lot has been discussed here. I would submit to you that infrastructure, and in particular, we're talking about charging infrastructure, has tremendous signaling value. But speaking from a parochial point of view, which is to say the Tesla Roadster has a range of almost 250 miles on a single charge, can be charged in 3.5 to 4 hours, and that's not using extraordinary equipment. We have, and given the fact that most drivers drive less than 40 miles a day, you already leave the garage, even if you significantly reduce the range and thus the cost of a car. You already have significant range on first-generation EVs to accomplish daily tasks, assuming home charging. So, to my point, tremendous signaling value, but perhaps shouldn't be the sole focus of this endeavor. As Tom Kiket and others have mentioned, there's an 80-20 way to cut this problem, and that is look at the distribution of driving, look at the distribution of our vehicles, look at the distribution of early generations of other manufacturers' vehicles, and set the infrastructure up accordingly. Home and work are the best possible situations. Who gets well on this? Well, look, we get requests every day to put charging infrastructure in hotels, shopping centers, wineries up in Napa Valley, places where Starbucks, places where they would like to generate business. I think that's the early generation solution. People will see commercial value in having charging infrastructure nearby. Metering it, that's a pretty simple problem too from a technology standpoint. If you put it in, all things being equal, you probably ought to get credit for putting it in, and you might even be able to offset those costs. So all things being equal, I think that's a fairly simple problem to address. So all I would suggest you, while we're broadly supportive of infrastructure, and we want to be a catalyst, indeed we probably already are a catalyst for the installation of charging infrastructure, I would ask that you not regard it so much as a gating factor to the introduction of this technology. More important from our perspective is, as the Senator and others here have mentioned, is achieving some sort of clarity in the regulatory architecture having to do with the utilities, having to do with other adjacent industries, so that charging rates, again applying simple laws of economics, recommend to individuals that they charge at night when there's low base load or at other times of the day. And you can do that very simply with pricing signals. Clarifying and simplifying all of the regulations associated with installing a home charging system. I mean, when we started this, it was extraordinary what we encountered. I got I can't recall the exact title, but I became very familiar with a 3-inch tome of regulations associated with any kind of electrical installation in the home environment. I think that a great work can be done to simplify that process. And then there's a broad constellation of technologies in this smart grid arena. The ones, and I don't want to go through the portfolio, and I'm not qualified to tell you which ones are most important. But at a high level, the ones that I would commend to your attention are the ones that increase information transparency to the customer, to the user, so that they really understand what's going on. It can be as simple as a utility bill that can be read and understood and acted upon. But we live in a world where we can push extraordinary amounts of technology to very simple devices, and clearing the decks for this sort of information technology, I think, is critically important. So with that, thank you very much for your time and your attention. I'll conclude.
Great. Thank you, Mr. O'Connell. Do any of my colleagues have any questions for this current group? Go right ahead, Mr. Perryhill.
Thanks. Has there been any discussion on the fleet for California, our fleet up here, and working with you guys to, for example, I'm just thinking, I probably would have never on my own bought a hybrid, but I bought an Escape for my state car, and I love it. I love it. And I'm just wondering if there's been any discussions with Tulsa and any of the other motor companies on doing something with the state.
Since you called us out first, we're very interested in the idea of fleet purchase at the state and the federal level, at the local level. We've done preliminary studies to sort of roll up the total numbers to see what kind of volumes one could aggregate. It's a little difficult to aggregate that market, though, so it's a little bit difficult for a small manufacturer such as ourselves to project that we're going to have that we're going to focus a vehicle on that market. We would love to think that that the state would purchase fleets of the Model S for use by state officials. That would be terrific. But I think it's going to be down the road when we will have a vehicle that's suitable for broader public purchase. Though I'm quite confident that there are very particularized plans among some of the major OEMs, and in particular the Detroit OEMs, to address this market.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. I think we're going to have our next group of panelists, and I want to thank you guys, and I'm pretty sure there's going to be some follow-up questions if you guys don't mind staying around for a moment or two. Is that okay?
Sure.
Next, we have the electricity providers. We have Bill Boyce, Doug Kim, Jen Berman, and Alex Kim. If you're available, please come forward.
Lowenthal and Chairperson Bradford and the other members of the Assembly for the opportunity to speak here today. I'm Bill Boyce, and I represent the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, where I've served as the lead of the Electric Transportation Group for the last decade. Want to make about 4 points today. The first two, I think, have been covered somewhat in the very first session with regards to the impacts to the grid we anticipate with electric vehicle and electric vehicle charging. Imperative in our program design that we get as much of this load more or less to come off-peak to minimize the impacts. The third point I would want to bring up is another concern, which is in long-term emissions, the utility sector effectively is going to be asked to take the burden of carbon from the transportation sector when electrification occurs. And this is something we're very worried on in the fact that the electricity sector is being asked to clean up two sectors in order to make state policy go forward. Lastly, we'll cover, and my colleagues will also share, all the utilities in the state are very much getting ready to support the customers buying plug-in vehicles. A lot of program design and a lot of activity currently ongoing. At SMUD, we do have a long history of continuous support for electric vehicles. We've been working on these since 1989 and going for the last 21 years. We've covered a wide range of technologies. One of the things I'll just underscore is the equal importance of electric transportation as used in a fuel with regards to reduction of petroleum, and that gets into national security and also helps recycle money to the economy in the fact that we are transferring less oil-related dollars overseas. Expected vehicle launches, there's been a lot of charts shown up here. I think for the utilities outside of business case, this is most important for us with regards to how to project the impacts to the grid that are coming. Utilities, government agencies, industry associations, whole host of marketing consultants have all been looking at different models of how fast this market will grow. There's a lot of variables, price of oil being one, price of batteries and lithium being others will come out to be. At SMUD, we've adopted a model that really takes a look at 200,000 vehicles in California by about 2015. And then building upon that, about 1 million plug-in vehicles in the state by 2020. And I bring this up because that's very important with us with regards to design of the electrical system and the electrical grid to meet that load, and the market growth and locations are very important to us. The expected grid impacts, studies from various institutions, UC Berkeley, UC US DOE, and Pacific Northwest National Laboratories have really hit on this, I think, the best, is that the significant number of vehicles can be brought online if we charge off peak. And obviously, Commissioner Ryan hit on that quite a bit, but in our sense, establishing programs and policies to encourage the customers to charge off peak is of paramount importance. At SMUD, we have had an EV incentive rate for a long time to encourage this. It's basically a time of use rate to motivate customers to charge off peak whenever possible. However, one of the things that you get into with this is, I mentioned, additional emissions. We will have to increase utility generation, power plants, and potential local distribution impacts will also be in the future. And we talked about earlier with Commissioner Ryan and Prius's on her neighborhood block, clustering due to customer demographics will bring localized impacts. With regards to greenhouse gases, the electrification In general terms, the California grid's very clean. It brings about a 60% reduction in greenhouse gases. However, I kind of mentioned this in the very first bullet, that electrification will cause the greenhouse gas emissions in the electric sector to go up. Our programs and being discussed at utilities at the regulatory level really don't take in this shift of emissions into a lot of the planned policies going forward. And essentially, we're being asked to take on the challenge of cleaning up two sectors. Whereas this issue is really brought up in a couple of areas in the AB 32 regulatory elements, we really have not seen it consistently recognized across the board or a detailed study to define a mechanism of how to address it. Back to the clustering issue, electric vehicle charging, largely an issue where several people end up charging electric vehicles in the same neighborhood. Current standards allow some electric vehicles to charge at very high rates, upwards of 19 kilowatts per vehicle, which is equivalent of 4 times the average household summertime load. So this is quite a significant. Most transformers can usually handle about 4 to 8 customers. This would essentially bring 4 more houses on right away. We do expect the average load to be a little bit lower in the 3 to 6 kilowatt range, but once again, that will tend to have impacts as well. Because of this issue, not only is it important for utilities to know how many vehicles are coming, it's also important for us to try to get as much information as to where those vehicles land in our service territory. So in some of the programs we're developing, in soliciting customers for their locational data when they sign up for a rate is very important for us to continue grid planning. I will bring up one aspect with regards to potential for unregulated third-party service providers entering the market. We tend to feel that the third-party service providers may not have the same responsibility to conserve energy or shift load off-peak like utilities do. And since they will be more concerned with selling as much energy and usage as possible, there will be potential impacts where they will be trying to sell as much as possible. Utilities in general are always trying to conserve energy, and that will bring a little bit of a juxtaposition with regards to how we approach this. Readiness support plans. To support the coming wave of the vehicles, SMUD is currently developing new customer support programs, specifically to support the customers. Already, I think all the utilities are getting calls from customers about infrastructure, about special rates, what can they do. So designing programs and informational programs to help them is definitely ongoing. Program on the education, some key points, not only educating customers, but we see having to educate auto dealers and salespeople, not unlike what utilities do for appliance dealers and rebates on energy-efficient refrigerators. We're going to need to get down into the sales force of the automotive industry to help us with that with regards to a lot of the program specifics. Back office processes. Right now, the number of electric vehicles is very small. Just about all the processes are one-off hand bills, but we'll need to automate that. And a lot of the programs that SMUD we're looking at is also how to network that with smart grid to have all this automated. One aspect of a recent ARRA award will be looking at that at SMUD. Permit streamlining, I think Dearman covered that quite a bit in his last speech with regards to the need and coordination of installation. It goes down even farther to the contractors, the metering crews, the other people in the utilities who will touch. And we plan on basically having education and conducting some trial runs this summer ourselves to work out some of the aspects and go through practice. Summary and closeout, we have a long history at SMUD with commitment to electric transportation. The vehicles will be here soon. I didn't really need to cover that because it's been so well covered already. Imperative we get the vehicles to charge off-peak as much as possible. We are getting ready to support the customers who are coming into the marketplace, already contacting utilities. And lastly, with the long-term growth, we really need to bring some solutions and some studies of how to deal with the significant shift of emissions from the transportation sector over onto the electric sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
So good afternoon, and thank you for providing this opportunity for me to share with you what Southern California Edison is doing to prepare for this emerging market. My name is Doug Kim. I am the director of PB Readiness Program, which was launched last year in Southern California Edison to have cross-the-company effort to really prepare ourselves to become that fuel and infrastructure provider for the cars that are coming out. So for over 2 decades now, Southern California Edison has been very much involved in electric transportation, primarily in the areas of demonstrating and testing how the technology would interface with our systems. But from an operational perspective as well, we have today operate one of the largest private electric fleet in the country with about 18 million electric miles logged. So we're very proud of that. And as we are looking ahead at the developing market, which we think is going to be sometime around November or December when the cars will arrive, we're quite excited about these opportunities. But at the same time, we feel a very strong commitment to make sure that we serve the market very well in its early stage. So in the early years, we think that Southern California will be one of the first and potentially one of the largest markets in the country. It's a car culture, as many of you know. So there are many, many important things, critical things that we need to think about, given how fast the market is approaching and that it's going to be in this early stage. We are focusing on 3 key areas. Number 1 is let's make sure that our distribution network can reliably serve the incremental loads that these cars represent. We believe that in the early years, we may see some clustering effect in certain neighborhoods, which will certainly put a stress on our neighborhood distribution circuits. So we're very much focused on making sure that we can reliably serve the customers in those neighborhoods. Second important thing, let's streamline our processes to provide customers with a positive experience, which we believe is a key also in the early part of the market. And the third key piece is providing customers with education in how to become plug-in ready. There are a lot of things that people are not familiar with, so we want to make sure that we provide lots of information to our customers, as well as we are working with a number of stakeholders today, such as automakers, cities, charging infrastructure installers, and other commercial entities to make sure that we provide seamless service to our customers. So those are the 3 key areas that we're totally focused on today. Now, to prepare ourselves, it is very important to have a point of view about how big this market is going to be. A number of speakers mentioned today this is a really challenging thing to do because the market does not exist today. Having said that, though, we still have to have a point of view because we have to prepare ourselves for the certain size of the market. So what we did is we looked at about 10 different external studies that are out there published by various different folks. And we analyzed those and came up with our high, medium, and low cases going out to 2020. So just in a nutshell, by 2015, I think our mid case suggests maybe about 100,000 cars in our service area. And by 2020, potentially about 450,000 cars. Having said that, they could be higher depending on a number of factors, the gas price, the policies of the government. So we're also preparing to handle higher case as well, 200,000 cars by 2015, potentially up to 1 million cars by 2020. So that's kind of sets the framework for the work that we're doing as a company. Let me talk about each one of those 3 areas pretty quickly. Distribution system impact. I mentioned that these cars could potentially have some impact on our distribution network. Certainly in the early years, we don't see any impact on larger stuff like transmission or generation side of it. But it's going to be around your neighborhood circuits and transformers. The question is, what's so unusual about these plug-in cars? Well, they are large electric loads. Depending on what level people charge, it could go up to 19 kilowatt, which will represent multiple homes. So not only that they move around, right? They don't charge in one place. You could live in one place and work in some other service territory of different utilities. So we need to keep track of that as well. So when the customers charge cars also, we talked about off-peak charging versus on-peak charging. That would also have impact on the grid system. So there are a number of factors that we have to consider. So basically what we did is, studying last year, we have something like 4,300 circuits in our 50,000 square miles. So we have done an extensive modeling of these circuits. And then we basically analyzed the physical impact on those circuits based on a number of different scenarios of what we might expect when the cars actually show up. How many cars, where, what level, when do they charge? So we ran a bunch of different type of scenario analysis to get to where we are today. So the next step now then, with that information, we are looking to see how we can manage that impact. One key to success here is to obtain information. Information is a key. Early adopters, we're working with automakers as well as our own outreach program to identify who these customers are before they bring the cars home. And we're also looking at ways to develop capabilities in-house to be really, really good at determining the early indicators of where the market is going to go. So we're going to have an ongoing team to keep track of those kind of early market indicators. Now, implementation phase, still early in the game, but we do have a few months, but we also have some ideas. For example, we have an extensive infrastructure replacement programs that are ongoing today. So what we're doing is we're overlaying some of these projections on top of that replacement program. We're also looking at modifying some of the design standards such that transformers may be upsized bigger in order to account for clustering of PEBs. So we're doing that work as well. And I already talked about centrally coordinated service planning activities. We believe that's really key until sometime later when we, as the company, can handle cars as any other load additions to our system, as we have done. Second focus, residential installation process. What we want to make sure is that residential customers will have a simple and efficient charging installation process when they bring the cars home. Why the residentials first? We believe the first adopters will likely be the ones who can charge the cars conveniently in their garage and be able to take full advantage of what the PEBs can offer, i.e. the daily driving habits of these customers will meet the range considerations of batteries. Over time, for sure, we would expect to see an appropriate level in the growth of public charging, but at least in the very, very early years, we think that this is primarily what we're going to see. We have some experience last year with Mini E pilot program. We had something like 120 Mini E's in our service area, which we had to serve. And we saw in some cases the installation charging installation process could take up to about 50 days.
Mr. Kim, you have 2 more minutes before we move on to the next panelist.
Right.
Thank you.
I'll rush along. So basically what we're doing there is making sure that we are working with all of the stakeholders, because as somebody mentioned earlier, it's about the handoffs and stuff like that. So we're focusing on that as well. Stakeholder engagement, 2 things that I want to say here that are really important. We're working with the OEMs and installers. We're looking to direct customers through the channel to us so that we can engage those customers. And then we want to talk to them about our rate options, which is considerably lower at the evening hours. And we are also working with the cities. We have over 180 cities in our service area. We are working with those folks to help them understanding some of the PEB technical issues, but we're also supporting them in terms of getting the funding that are available out there, such as AB 118. And the last point, there's a lot of need for customer education. and we're looking to focus on non-traditional platforms. Certainly we've done things like mailers and things like that, but we believe that early adopters will primarily be getting their information from the internet, and those are the sources that we're really, really going after. Bottom line, we want to funnel these folks over to our website where we can talk about different rate options. We're going to have rate calculators on our website so that people can figure out how much money they will be saving on the different rates. And we'll also have some video vignettes and things like that that will help them walk through the processes that are involved. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next presenter, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairperson Lowenthal and Bradford, for this opportunity, as well as the board members. Unfortunately, Jan Berman could not make it today, so I am her replacement. My name is Saul Zombrano. I am the director of the Integrated Demand Side product portfolio for PG&E, which includes energy efficiency, demand response, as well as electric vehicles. I'm going to follow very much a similar format that Bill followed, and start off with key points that we want to share with Assembly members. And I think the first one, and I think you've heard it with both utilities, is PG&E is prepared to provide our customers the services and support they need when electric vehicles hit the market. We are incredibly excited about this transformation to electrify the transportation sector, and we have a long history of supporting alternative and clean air technologies. Our history goes back as well, a couple of decades, and we supported natural gas, the introduction of natural gas vehicles. Some of the first conversions of plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, both the light-duty vehicle as well as the bucket trucks. And we've also have demonstrated grid-connected electric vehicles in some of our demonstration pilots, as well as one of the key strategies for us from an operational perspective. The fleet question came up. We are actually in the process of electrifying our fleet, whether it's hybrid technology or whether it's electric vehicles or vehicles like the Volt, which are plug-in electric vehicles, which that first 40 miles is dedicated electric. One of the other key points I would like to bring up is that we are working with all the segments of the industry, both the automobile industry as well as the technology sector. I come from a technology background, and one of the reasons I joined PG&E was I was incredibly excited about this opportunity in electric vehicles, and realized that a lot of what will happen going forward in the next few years is going to be the integration of new technologies, both at the automobile level as well as information systems, and how they integrate into the utility back-end offices. We are actively involved with auto manufacturers, electrical contractors, and local government and equipment vendors. One of the key areas that I'd like to highlight is that PG&E is the chair of the Infrastructure Working Council, which was a council that was responsible for defining the plug-in interface for these vehicles. One of the lessons learned from the 90s was that there was multiple ways to charge vehicles with three different interfaces, and it's when we realized that we were going to get a second bite at the apple. It's just like we thought it was critical that we were one of the lead utilities driving leadership on defining that common standard at the plug-in level, and we chair that council at the behalf of EPRI. And working closely with the Society of Automotive Engineers. We are also working at the national level. As a member of the Electrification Coalition and other industry and government advisory groups, we are developing and promoting national and uniform EV standards. We believe this, like most successful technology adoption cycles, standards are critical, and so we are actively pushing at both the state and the federal level to make this happen. And then foremost is we believe, like the other people, like the other utilities have mentioned, that it is critical to charge these vehicles off-peak. There's a difference between off-peak and peak in California of 2x. So the peak load in California is twice the off-peak load. And if you think about what that means that off-peak load really, during the nighttime, really represents a wonderful opportunity to cost-effectively provide charging for these vehicles. And that, from our perspective, was one of the critical things that we are looking for our customers, because there's been a lot of talk about the incremental investment requirement for these batteries. Well, in order for the batteries to, in order for the consumer to have a payback, like there be a viable payback option for the consumer, you have to charge it off-peak with the least expensive electricity. If you're charging on-peak, and you have the added burden of the incremental investment for an electric vehicle battery, you never really pay it back, right? So so you got to use off-peak electricity with low rates, which the utilities and the state of California has a history of supporting, to effectively create an economic business case for the consumer to support the investment of these batteries. Now, we realize, I think, as all utilities, is that the utilities in California have a history of integrating and providing customer education for the development of new technologies, whether it's electric vehicles, whether it's energy efficiency, and whether it's demand response. We believe that we will be asked to serve in that capacity, and we've actually, developed teams around that. We do so. One of the key areas, though, that we've identified, and it's interesting because and this was a lesson learned from not only from what happened in Southern Cal Edison's territory with the Mini-E, but also in our territory as well, but not necessarily related to any particular program, is that permitting is a key criteria for we have to simplify the permitting process. If you don't simplify the permitting and inspection process, what that does is that really creates an extended installation process for these fast chargers. And and the other key area is that when we look at the rollout of these vehicles, the electric vehicle purchase notification is going to be critical for us so that our service planning groups can effectively respond quickly to the needs of our customers. And also, so relative to this clustering dynamic, we will have the capacity to understand if there's going to be grid reliability or impact issues at the distribution level relative to the clustering. Now, what have we done? I think the key thing that we've done is, there was a handout that was passed out, but when you look at the adoption forecast for these vehicles, these vehicles are coming. The question is to what degree and how fast. We firmly believe that they're going to make a sizable portion of the transportation sales going forward. And really, like what Doug had highlighted earlier, is that the gas prices and the environmental ethic are moving in the favor of the adoption of these vehicles. And they are significant based on different forecasts that we utilize that are actually, we chose to go with third-party forecasts to really understand, what is real, what is not, and not necessarily get into the forecasting game. But what is interesting about California is we adopt more of our fair share of Prius-type vehicles. We make up 12% of the population in California, and we've adopted approximately 27% of the Priuses sold in the United States. So that is a combination of our environmental ethic. It's also a combination of the fact that we drive a lot of miles, and and there's an economic business case to consumers to purchase those vehicles. And then if you believe in the acceleration of peak oil, which isn't too far to imagine based on what's happening in the Gulf, directionally it's really looking like there's going to be a healthy adoption of these vehicles in our market. So when we look at what do we need to do as utility, there's two critical things that we've done, very similar to what Southern Cal Edison has done. We formed a core team, to specifically address all the work that we need to do relative to the regulatory work, the clean air transportation work, the service planning work, the transmission and distribution work, the energy procurement work, and then the IT integration that's going to be required. And that's an internal-facing exercise to get the utility ready to support the introduction of the vehicles. But what we've also done, in partnership with the PUC, who provided us the funding, we've actually created a load management, a demand response or load management pilot with EPRI. EPRI is Electric Power Research Institute. They are one of the central research and development arms for the utility sector. And we created a pilot that we are going to bring to market in 2010, where we will have a load management software application that connects to smart chargers at the consumer's house that will effectively allow us to mitigate the impact of on-peak charging. And it's the first in its kind pilot in the U.S. and actually in the world. It's in partnership with EPRI. And the specific reason we did it with EPRI is because as an EPRI pilot, we were able to bring other utilities, whether they were state utilities, federal utilities, or international utilities, into this pilot to effectively look at what does it take to do smart charging via smart software is like connected to fast chargers that are deployed in our service territory. And then relative to policy recommendations, I don't know how I'm doing on time, but wrap it up, okay? I think there's ones that, one of the key ones I would like to highlight is California building officials on whether they are, and CEC, relative to update Title 24 for installation of chargers with new construction, streamline processing, and then from an ARB and a PUC, it's really to work as stakeholders, to ensure a smooth transition of these vehicles. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe we have one last speaker on this panel, and then one more panel to go.
Well, I don't see the presentation on here, so I know you have a copy of the slides, so I'll just go ahead and proceed. My name is Alex Kim. I am the Director of Customer Innovations for San Diego Gas and Electric. No relationship to my colleague Doug Kim. Thank you for inviting me to represent San Diego Gas and Electric on this panel. The presentation you have in front of you is for San Diego Gas and Electric. And my focus today is primarily to just speak with you about and tell you about the activities that we have going on in San Diego. SDG&E has been a leader in innovation. My responsibilities do include the electric vehicle market. And one of those areas, and we've been leading the market, is working on our collaboration with Nissan and E-Tech. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that project specifically. But first of all, I want to go over some of the goals that we believe are needed for the electric vehicle market. And you've heard much of this already today, so I'm not going to go too much into detail. But I do think they're important, which is why I want to reiterate them. One of them is, again, we need to create an excellent customer experience. I think many times when we talk about the market, we do forget about the customer. And in order to do that, we've talked a lot about what happens when the customer buys the vehicle, but we also need to make sure the customer is educated before they buy the vehicle. To make sure they understand the rates that are available, the options that are available to them, what it's going to take for them to be able to charge the vehicles, and so on. And so we think that's a very important piece for us to help in the utility role that can help enable the market. Secondly, as was mentioned, is creating convenient infrastructure for charging. We do believe, as well as some of my fellow colleague utilities that have spoken, that most of the charging will be done at home. But we do also see a need for public charging. There is going to be a need, as was mentioned earlier, for customers that don't have a garage, for example. Initially, that might be relatively low, but we do to make sure that customers do have that availability to be able to charge their vehicles. Also, that don't have, again, garages, or for an instance where they may run out of charging their vehicles, for example, and need to charge their vehicles in order just to get home. Lastly, but just as importantly, is the safe integration of these electric charging stations within the utility system. We are working on developing smart charging systems. We're actively working with the OEMs, also with the California Energy Commission and others, and also partnering with the local stakeholders, because again, we don't believe this can happen without a true collaboration and partnership with the local stakeholders. On the next slide, we talk about our collaboration with EcoTotality, formerly known as E-Tech. This is going to provide a tremendous jump start to the San Diego region. It's the largest electric infrastructure deployment in U.S. history. San Diego is one of 5 regions in the U.S. that have been selected. There's going to be almost $100 million of ERA funding that will be going towards this project. And $8 million will be coming from the CEC as well, too. In San Diego, there's going to be over 1,000 electric chargers that are going to be available for those who are willing to participate in the program. The intent of that program is for us to be able to collect data, valuable data and information about how customers charge their vehicles, when they're charging their vehicles, and how receptive they are to different pricing as well, too. In addition to that, there's going to be commercial charging stations as well that are going to be available. And I've neglected to mention those charging stations are also going to be available free of charge to the consumer, so at least for this test. And again, in order for them to be able to qualify for that, they're going to need to be able to participate in the test. And so we expect a very large participation rate in San Diego. As I mentioned, commercial charging stations and public charging stations, there's going to be 1,450 public charging stations and commercial charging stations, as well as 60 fast charging stations as well, too, as part of this test. The next slide there you see is talking about our regional planning and what we're doing in San Diego in the year 2010 and 2011. As I mentioned, right now we've developed a very collaborative process with EcoTotality, with Nissan, and again all the region stakeholders, including SANDAG, who's the Association of Governments in San Diego, to target locations in San Diego where they can place these 1,400 plus charging stations. Working collaboratively with the utility, identifying where the hotspots are, as well as where places that are needed for both public charging as well as for commercial charging. SDG&E is involved in that process, again, to help identify the places that have the least impact on our system, and also to help find how to have the least amount of cost as well to the system. Next slide there is some of the activities that we're currently undertaking right now to be ready. As I mentioned, the customer service and outreach. So one of the things that are, as was mentioned earlier, that's going to be necessary is to make sure that our call centers, for example, are ready. We know as the utility, when these new technologies are rolled out, unlike a regular vehicle, because you can plug it into the wall, we understand that our customer is going to be calling the utility, and we need to make sure our call centers are prepared. As Mr. Kim also talked about, we're also making sure that our website and the electronic communication channels are also available to be able to support our customers. And was also mentioned, we're also, again, working with the different stakeholders to make sure that the multifamily as well as the single-family customers are represented, working with the fleet vehicle chargers as well, and entities, as well as the public entities. As part of our design process, again, we are getting our experience from working with EcoTotality and making sure that that process can help enable us and develop a platform for the longer term. And so this is a really good opportunity for us, not to just for SDG&E, but for us to also, and we are sharing this information with our fellow utilities as well. Thirdly is the early identification of the owner. And so this was mentioned a couple times. And this is a very important process for us because without understanding where the vehicles are, it's very difficult for us to plan our distribution system without understanding where the load is. And so we're working with the automakers, we're working with dealers to try to get that information available to us. This will help us with our forecasting as well. And then lastly, we're managing the integration of the grid with our smart meter functionality. So as part of our smart grid demonstration projects, which we have going on in SDG&E, we're also including electric vehicle charging as a part of that. So again, we're going to be gathering a lot of good data that we're going to be able to share. Lastly, we're working with experimental rates as well too. So we've proposed to the Public Utilities Commission right now 3 experimental rates, which these customers would be able to make available to them, and this is really going to test the availability for them to be able to choose whether or not the different charging rates at different times of the day, whether it's during the peak or during the off-peak, is going to make a difference. Is that price difference enough for them to encourage them and to incentivize them to charge at home? So with that concludes my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from colleagues here? Mr. Bradford?
Yes, as it relates to, I don't want to be facetious, but you mentioned your call centers, and after dealing with an issue a couple of weeks ago where we see a lot of utilities shifting these calls outside the state of California and the U.S., I would hope that your call center would be placed here down in your service territory in San Diego.
I don't know the specific plans for our call center in general. I do know that we are preparing our call centers to be able to take these calls, but that is not my area, so I'm not sure exactly what our plan is, our long-term plan is for our call centers.
Okay, could you follow up and get back with us as it relates to that? As it relates to SMUD or any of the other utilities, I'm just curious, what is the cost of installation right now for a meter to be installed in a home, the rough cost for a charging station at a home?
Current cost with regards to our program, the customer would pay approximately $250 for what we call a dual meter adapter to install a second meter for this particular load. So that is the cost in the utility side with regards to the service. Of course, the customer will probably have to have an electrical system upgrade, and that's typically on the customer side at this time.
And that's, I guess, the real catcher right there is, what does it cost to upgrade that system? Is it as simple as I stated in my open comments, changing from a 100 amp to a 200 amp panel, or do you have to upgrade the service feed from your nearest point of delivery to the home? I mean, that becomes very costly.
Most of what we experienced was regularly just a panel upgrade. And one thing I want to go back, there's various different technologies now that we didn't have before. Plug-in hybrids are expected to charge at a lower rate, which might not require any upgrade. Could be done with 110 electricity, whereas some of the larger battery pack electric vehicles are going to have to go to what we call level 2, which is 240 volt. That's where you need a panel upgrade. The average cost, I think, in our recollection, in our experience, is by the time the customer purchases a charger and pays for the upgrade is somewhere in the neighborhood of $2,000.
One thing I would add to that is that it's San Diego Gas and Electric probably has the most experience relative to whether a panel upgrade is needed. It's a lot of the, I know I used to live in Atlanta, and I had a house at a 200 amp service. It's with sufficient room in the breaker that there was no panel upgrade, there was no mainline upgrade. And the house would have been able to handle a full electric vehicle. Now, relative to our experience, one of the things we are exploring as one of our scenarios is leveraging our smart meter to actually backhaul the usage that from the electric vehicle from a consumption perspective. So you can really go down a path of you have a dual meter solution, or you leverage the smart meter that's already installed, because that smart meter has communication capabilities to communicate back and forth to what's called what Bill referenced, level 2 smart charger that communicates to the meter.
I would only voice the exception to, I guess, your Atlanta example. I'm pretty sure that's a fairly new home that was built in Atlanta versus older homes. I don't know too many older homes that have been built prior to 1960 that would have a 200 amp panel.
No, that's actually fair. The Atlanta home was actually built in the 40s, and but it did have a service upgrade, and one of the things about these chargers is you can size these chargers. I don't think. Yeah, there you go. You can size these chargers so that so that you can take into consideration the what's at the home, right? So it's just like you can size this charger so it charges at 1.4, or it charges at 3.3, or it charges at 6.6 a kilowatt. And what you do is, or what an installer would do is, they would look at the panel, they would look at the what's the service line that goes into the panel, and then make a recommendation as to what is the best charger option without an upgrade opportunity.
I just want to thank all of you for being very focused on education so that people will better understand what it is they have to do. I'm sure there will be risks down the road, whether there are folks who don't upgrade the electric at home and perhaps use a kit or use something that has not been provided by the actual dealer, but they do something on their own. They plug it in, sparks a fire, the circuit breaker. I don't know. These are questions we all have to ask ourselves for the future. Would there be any liability there if it hasn't been done properly, and who is liable? So anyway, I just want to thank you all, particularly for focusing on the education component, because that's going to take us a long way. Thank you. And our last panel, thank you for waiting so long. I know we'll have questions when you're finished, so I would ask you each, if you wouldn't mind, to shorten your presentation slightly, if that's possible, so we can have questions at the end. Nice to see you again, Jason.
Thanks, Bonnie.
So I can go ahead and start?
Please.
So I don't have a slide presentation. Good afternoon, committee chairs and members. My name is Eileen Wenger-Tutt, and I am the Executive Director of the California Electric Transportation Coalition, CALETC. CALETC is a nonprofit organization committed to successful electric transportation in California, from forklifts to heavy-duty vehicles to cars. We believe that successful deployment of electric transportation in this state will help grow our economy and is essential to reduce air pollution and avoid climate change. I first want to really briefly, but I think it's important, recognize the leadership that California has shown in attracting plug-in electric vehicles. And by plug-in electric vehicles, what I mean are either pure battery electric vehicles or plug-in battery electric vehicles. First of all, I want to recognize the efforts of the Energy Commission and the Air Resources Board in distributing the AB 118 money, which will help ensure that the needed infrastructure is installed in this state and help bring the cost of the initial vehicles down until they reach economies of scales or the prices at economy of scale. I think the PUC proceeding is doing a lot to identify barriers and help us think about how we might overcome those barriers. And that proceeding was supported by SB 626. The Treasurer's Office is providing low-interest loans to plug-in electric vehicle manufacturers in California, local governments, and other entities that are helping bring these vehicles to market. And then there are many other policies in this state that support alternative fuels and plug-in electrics, including the Energy Commission's Alternative Fuels Plan through AB 1007, the Air Board Zero Emission Vehicle Program, the Low Carbon Fuel Standard, Global Warming Solutions Act, or AB 32, and then the GHG vehicle standards, which were recognized again by the Rose Garden announcement last week. So these programs are the reasons that California leads in green tech, and the people of California support green tech and the progressive leadership shown by all branches of government. Despite these very difficult times, people in this state recognize that clean cars are needed, that they create jobs, that they reduce our dependence on foreign oil, and that they prevent global warming. So in April of this year, the Electrification Coalition, and Robert Lowenthal is an esteemed member, released a report that enumerated the economic and jobs creation benefits of plug-in electric vehicles. I know Mr. Lowenthal is going to talk about that, so I won't say any more about it. But in general, it's just intuitively obvious that electric vehicles that use cleaner and cheaper domestically produced fuels and require a new infrastructure paradigm will create jobs in this state. And that we can even benefit further if California leads and we can export those ideas and technologies to other states. Now, I want a word of caution, because with all of this good news, it might seem that successful large-scale deployment of electric vehicles is a given, but unfortunately the opposite is actually true. If history provides any lessons for us, it's overwhelmingly evident that transitioning the transportation sector to any fuel other than petroleum is unlikely. Our state has been a progressive leader for many, many years in alternative fuel vehicles, but we have not ever reached large-scale deployment of any alternative fuel or alternative fuel vehicle. From the first methanol effort to the big zero-emission vehicle effort, this state hasn't succeeded in bringing alternative fuels to market. So I don't want to take away any of our successful efforts to clean up petroleum fuel vehicles, and I believe that perhaps the threat of alternative fuels did help get those vehicles to the point they are now, where we have very, very clean gasoline vehicles. But even in the hybrid electric vehicle, as was mentioned previously, they only make up about 2 or 3% of the total U.S. market and maybe about double that in California. And I don't think any of us would consider that to be large-scale deployment. So right now, I guess my message is that we really don't have the luxury of failing this time. Quite simply, if we fail, we'll fail to meet both our environmental goals in the state and our economic goals. So the previous failures maybe did have a silver lining, because I think really, I don't even know that I'd call them failures, because the truth is that we got cleaner petroleum-fueled vehicles as a result of all of these efforts. But this time, if we don't succeed, we aren't going to meet our AB 1007 goals, and we won't meet our greenhouse gas emission goals, and our zero-emission vehicle program will not succeed. So from an economic perspective, if this state succeeds in large-scale deployment of electric vehicles, we're going to see continued growth in manufacturing of vehicles, infrastructure, and components. I think the reopening of the NUMMI plant with Toyota and Tesla is really good news. I want to point out that the Chinese company BYD is opening a plant in LA, and with these openings, we see jobs, we see good jobs, and they're in this state, and we can grow these jobs in the state with electric vehicles. So I want to point out that petroleum is subsidized very heavily, that they do have a stranglehold on the transportation fuels market, and that large-scale deployment of electric vehicles is going to be a huge challenge. Hearings like these are going to help keep the spotlight on the need, and they can help illuminate gaps. We are at the very beginning of an early market, and we're once again at the very beginning. I would say it's sort of like deja vu all over again. This generation of electric vehicles is stylish. They are exciting. The state policies in existence support this early market, but our biggest challenges are going to occur in the 3 to 5 year period where we really want to see large-scale deployment. So we at Cal ETC look forward to working with you to ensure the successful near-term market, and in our minds, almost more importantly, the large-scale deployment of clean electric transportation. So thanks for your time and consideration today.
Thank you very much. Next panelist.
I don't see my presentation up here, so I'll plug it in, but I think I can talk while it does its thing. Hi, my name is Richard Lowenthal. I'm the CEO of Coulomb Technologies. Thank you, Madam Chair and Mr. Chair, for having us today, and for the members of the Assembly that are here. We have a, here we go. Try to talk and do two things at once here, but it may be impossible. Good. Well, your computer is fast. Okay, so our company is about being sure that there's a place to charge every vehicle, so that if you are in the showroom floor and you're thinking about buying gasoline or electric, you don't worry about charging, and so you decide to buy electric. That's our mission. We're a Silicon Valley company. Our engineering is in Silicon Valley. Our manufacturing is in Silicon Valley. We are a big exporter. Over half our business goes outside. We ship outside the United States. It's about half of our business, a little more than that. And we're a venture-funded, classic Silicon Valley startup. Our mission really depends on us having a business model so that people will buy charging stations and deploy them so that there are enough out there for the drivers. The idea is that we don't want to live off of your subsidies forever. We'll welcome them to get started, but then we want a sustainable, growing business that grows with the EV market. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. So what we make are charging stations. We're known for our charging stations. We're proud to have one now in the Smithsonian because it's so pretty. But we spend more of our time in engineering on business practice software for things like a billing system, so that someone who owns a station, for instance, a condominium association, can collect the money for the driver who's using that station. And you'll see a few other applications. We are very technology deep. We have 16 patents filed, a couple of awarded. We started shipping Q1 of last year. Our customers are in cities and counties. Several cities in California have our infrastructure. San Francisco does. San Jose does. Martinez, Pleasant Hill, lots of cities in California have bought our equipment, although our largest single customer is the city of Amsterdam. Utilities are about 22% of our business. Corporations like McDonald's has our stations, Dell Computer has our stations for workplace charging. It's very broad. We're proud to announce, actually we haven't announced, but I'll mention, since this is such a tight-knit group here, that we've recently won a $37 million DOE program to deploy charging stations nationwide. A third of that will happen in California. And it is our match for the state of California came from a California Energy Commission AB 118 grant. Why electric vehicles? I think you've heard a lot about this, and this is from my EC background, but security issues, obviously we like to use a fuel we can make in the United States as opposed to one we need to buy, if nothing else, for a $500 billion trade deficit last year. No tailpipes, so no emissions. Electricity is a low-cost fuel for consumers, so there's some benefit to consumers. When you drive on electricity, it costs about 2 cents a mile. When you drive on gasoline, it costs 14 cents a mile. So obviously good for consumers too, and they like them. And here are some of the immediate cars. That's mine on the bottom in the middle. That's a BMW Mini E. The other cars are from Ford, Chevy, and Nissan. So how do we fuel them? The first generation of cars coming in the next 3 years take 4 hours to charge. The only reason that that's feasible is cars are parked 23 hours a day. So you just need one of our charging stations where you park them for long periods of time, presumably when you're sleeping and working. And if you do that, then charging is easier than fueling on gasoline because you don't have to go to the gas station anymore. So typically you plug your car in when you come home at night. It charges while you sleep. It's all charged up in the morning. Then you do, as I do, when you get to work, you plug in the car, and it's fully fueled at all times. It's challenging in some places. Apartments and condominiums are challenging because the condo association owns the meter, but doesn't want to. The other tenants don't want to pay for that lucky Tesla owner who spent $110,000 on his car. The other tenants don't want to pay for his lifetime of fuel. So we have a billing system so that you can collect the money from the owner of the vehicle. And what happens is we take the money from the driver and we give it to the owner of the station, presumably the condo association, to pay for electricity and maintenance and capital. Other places you need them: workplace, public lots, and curbside. San Francisco is an interesting case because there's 6 times as many cars as garages, which you've noticed if you've tried to park in North Beach ever in San Francisco. And so the challenge there is you need to charge at the workplace, you need charging in public lots, and you need charging stations in apartment buildings. Why do we need to have smart charging? First of all, to have these features like collect money from the drivers. Somebody asked about taxes earlier. We do have a mechanism for charging a transportation tax because the gasoline tax in California, you know, is about 18 cents a gallon, so we will need a replacement for that. So far, you have not implemented a tax on EVs, but we think one day. And then to recover other costs, obviously to make the grid efficient. So we work with the utility. This picture over here shows the demand in red of the California grid and the supply in green. The low point there where there's a big gap is the middle of the night, and that's where we want to charge the vehicles. It makes the grid more efficient. They don't need more generation. They don't need more transmission. So we put in tools in our products so that the grid can encourage people to charge at night, basically with pricing signals. We also get a number of other features. For instance, when I drive to San Francisco, I use my BlackBerry. I put in the address of where I'm going to go, and it navigates me to the closest station to that address that's not currently in use so that I can charge my Mini. If I can't do that, I can't get home that night because my Mini has a range of about 80 miles, and it's 50 miles from my office. So those kind of important features make life easier for the driver. So what we have, these are some of our charging stations. The one up, that photo is in San Jose. It goes on a light pole, very easy installation, much cheaper than most because it takes the energy out of the pole and mounts with 2 stainless steel straps. In San Francisco, they look like the one on the left where they're mounted in the ground and you have to trench in electricity. Most of the action, though, happens on our website, where you can go on live if you like in your leisure time, find all of our stations in the United States, which ones are in use, which ones are not, what kind of car is there. You can also, the bottom page is what a utility can use in order to run demand response, because all of our stations have demand response. So if you need to get them off the grid in times of a grid stress, you can. So we need a few policy changes in order to make this a successful industry. Number one is we need to be able to assign costs to drivers. That's so that not everybody in the rate base or not everybody, all the other tenants in an apartment have to pay. So we need that ability. The PUC proposed decision of last week, we would appreciate your endorsement of that decision. We believe that was the correct decision, which basically was a decision to allow a free market on the charging station business so that we can use our venture capital and run out and build this infrastructure for the car owners. Next thing is we believe in incentive rates. In fact, we think that they're key to getting this done without causing negative grid impacts. If we do that, if we implement incentive rates, and we in the charging business do as well, which we plan to, then the electric vehicles are actually helpful to the grid because they make it more efficient, because you use that generation and transmission capability that's at night that we've already paid for. So it's a very good idea to have incentive pricing. And that goes on to number three, basically all of smart grid integration. We've developed our product to fit into the advanced metering infrastructure, so it's part of the new grid. And so you want to have stations like ours that will fit with tomorrow's grid, not yesterday's. And we'd appreciate your endorsement of that. And finally, it's already been talked about, but local planning issues about installation streamlining is quite important. The other bullet, the first bullet under number 4, is more challenging. It's in a place like San Francisco. Currently, our charging stations in San Francisco are all curbside. We replace parking meters with our stations, which have parking meter functionality as well. But it is difficult to allocate spaces in a city like San Francisco because there aren't very many EVs yet, and people hate to see empty spaces in San Francisco. So it's always a challenge to get some spaces for the upcoming EV driver. If we don't do these things in San Francisco, nobody will buy an EV because there aren't any home garages. Only 1 out of 6 cars is in a garage at night. So we have to have public charging. We have to have charging in apartment buildings and condominiums, and we have to have charging at work, or it doesn't happen in a place like San Francisco. So we need your support on these issues. Finally, just a summary, we're going to need some charging stations if you want wide acceptance of the vehicles like we do. And we'll need a few policy changes, but other than that, the infrastructure is pretty well there to support us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Next speaker, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Lowenthal. Thank you, Chairman Bradford, Assembly members. It's great to be here. I think it's good to elevate a little bit the discussion, especially at this time of day, to really signal what California is doing here. If you look at all these players, companies from automotive, companies from charge infrastructure, regulators, universities, there's a whole ecosystem growing here, and we spend most of the day talking about risks and issues. So I'll try and maybe make my presentation a little bit lighter, a little bit about the opportunities, and expand the horizon not only to California, but what's going on around the world. But we are Californians. So starting in California, if we do look to the future, there's a tremendously bright future. And it's a little more simple in terms of getting there than a lot of what we've heard today in terms of discussions. The reason it's a little more simple than that is because the fundamental shift has happened. An electric mile in most of the Western world is actually cheaper to drive than a gasoline mile. And that is a critical element of the entire discussion that we're forgetting, because we're talking about early adopters and hybrids and paying a little bit more to drive a green vehicle. But we're forgetting that in most places in the Western world today, as we speak, there is a transition happening, and it's just going to be a question of how quickly and how broadly we get there. So I'd like to elevate the discussion to say, what is the impact on California when you do have millions of vehicles driving and displacing oil and gas with locally generated renewable energy? Our industry, and we've seen this in the last few weeks with Tesla and others, is a great platform just like when I came here in the early 90s, there was a platform called the Internet to drive to the next generation of technology. Now, if we look at our financial and budgetary situation, that we'd say, well, where are we going to invest in these things? And I've got really three policy asks that are simple to understand and simple to address. But in general, I'd like to surmise that we have a great opportunity of bringing the economy and California to the forefront globally, not just in the U.S. Better Place is a service provider. What we do is we take on putting the infrastructure out in the public domain, in the private homes, in the workplaces, and make sure that people can do what they've done before, which is have a contract with their vehicle, with their mobility product that is better and cheaper than the previous one. And we're operating in 9 countries and territories around the world, and I want to talk about some of the examples. So when I say it is something that allows you to do it at a better cost and a more competitive product, I mean we have to provide people with the infrastructure to refuel. And the question came on earlier today about, do I just provide charging and ask people to compromise their transportation to the amount of charge they can get through a very narrow pipe? Or do I provide them with the ability and the mitigation for range anxiety with all types of charge? And when we look at mass adoption, we believe that beyond the early adopter, there will be a need to provide instantaneous charge. So I know for a fact there is someone in this room today that has driven his vehicle from San Francisco to Sacramento today, and that is feasible. But the question is, are the masses going to be able to do that? And what if they want to turn around and go home the same day? We believe that a full system that allows you to overcome the 3 barriers, and there are really only 3 barriers. One is cost, one is range, and one is fully functional. People spoke about 2-seaters, 4-seaters, 5-seaters, SUVs, minivans. We really need to solve those 3 solutions in order to be able to reach the mass adoption. So by providing infrastructure out there that allows you to charge everywhere you go and allows you to switch when you need to extend your range, we can really enable people to do anything that they're used to doing today. In addition to that, allowing them to go in and view their information and be able to access the information either in the car or as they move around will give them the comfort to adopt these technologies and these products in masses. And finally, if you don't solve for the grid, when you do have millions of vehicles out there, you are really going to be in a position that you're not leveraging one of the biggest benefits, which is the fact that you have millions of vehicles with batteries. And those batteries are a great way to bring in additional renewable energy into the economy. So if we're talking about a renewable portfolio standard of 33%, this is a great complement to provide an end-to-end solution. And of course, one of the key things I'd like to mention is that we don't believe that this is the only model. We believe there will be multiple models of electric transportation for different segments of the population. So a couple of examples that we're seeing around the world. Israel in the last 2 years has deployed more charge infrastructure by one company with private money than all infrastructure that's been deployed in the U.S. in the last 2 years. Denmark, we've deployed an open access network in Denmark in preparedness for COP15 in December, and this has, of course, something that's just a little bit interesting to see, that even through, which was a little bit unfortunate for COP15, where you have the climate summit, that one of the toughest winters in recent memory in Denmark happened actually this past winter. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because mass adoption of these vehicles is not something that's going to be stopped by any weather or outside circumstance. And in just recently, in the last 3 weeks, we launched the ultimate vehicle test for an electric vehicle. If we want to transition all of our vehicle fleet to electric, we have to solve for the early adopter as well as for the commercial or a utilization like a taxi, which never has the time to stop and rest. So these taxis have been running since the end of April, almost 24/7. They do stop for less than 2 minutes to switch in their battery. And what is amazing is you're getting 30 impressions per day per taxi. Thousands of people are going through these things. And to the education point that someone mentioned here, it is showing the change and the fact that this is an inevitable transition. I think I started with California, and I want to end with the opportunity and the threat. We can continue to debate and to prolong the adoption. It will happen. We have no doubt. But the opportunity of a multi-trillion-dollar industry being born, and every day we get these examples that are very good for California's future, because of AB 32, because of other legislation. We're a California-based and founded company, but the market is huge, and where you're looking at things that are happening in China, we just announced last week a collaboration with the largest independent manufacturer and exporter of vehicles in China, Chery Automotive, on switchable vehicles for China. Finally, I just want to go back to the simple ask in the recipe. It requires 5 ingredients to succeed at mass, not 2-3% adoption in a decade. It requires cars, batteries. We're seeing car companies like Tesla, like Koda, like Fisker, tremendous innovators in this industry, as well as all the majors bringing plug-ins to the market, battery companies. Private investment is going into Silicon Valley battery companies at a rate that hasn't been done in 2-3 years. Charge infrastructure companies like Coulomb and Better Place, founded in California. Demand, we're providing in California $5,000 on top of a $7,500 federal, and if we extend that to the same length of time and numbers that the federal government provides, it's actually a net revenue bringer into the state. So it brings $7,500 for every $5,000 we invest. And finally, energy. We're talking about the Renewable Portfolio Standard and the 33%. We need to encourage both these things and look at them in conjunction, because the business case is really built on both sides together. So I'll just leave you with the fact that, we hope the fact that in 15 years from now, we will have doubled the number of cars in the world. 80% of buyers of cars in China are the first time that they're buying a vehicle. They're moving from bicycles. We're seeing amazing things around that are telling us that if we have just a small percentage of that trillions of dollars market in 15 years, California can look at this as a major opportunity, not a threat. So it is required to get to intelligent systems like we're talking about here today. There are requirements, but the 3 things we see that are critical are: 1, a clear and competitive marketplace, and that's why we really commend Commissioner Ryan and the PUC for putting out and saying this is how the market should evolve. The second thing is the infrastructure. As I said, that gasoline mile is more expensive than the electric mile in most of the Western world. At $3 a gallon, it's a neck-and-neck competition. So even here, it is still cheaper, but the fixed cost that is associated is a barrier that needs to be overcome. And the third thing is something that we've already done, is the $5,000 rebate, to extend that to match the federal $7,500 in terms of length and volume. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And the last speaker, please.
I'm Tom Turntime. I'm director of the Plug-in Hybrid and Electric Vehicle Research Center. Thank you very much for having me here today. I'm not sure how to turn off. I'm a Mac user, so.
Press X.
X, where?
I'll do it.
Thanks. See?
You got plenty of help.
That's good.
Yeah, you got all the IT people from Silicon Valley.
Yeah, that's right.
Real presentation?
Yeah. Did I plug it in right? It's in there. And I could just clip on this one here.
This? When you start talking, I'll open it.
Okay. I'm with the, as I said, with the Plug-in Hybrid Electric Vehicle Research Center at UC Davis. It's a peer-funded CEC center. You heard a little bit this morning from the CEC about that. We have been in business now since 2007.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks, Jason. And just a few things about that. You're probably familiar with the Institute of Transportation Studies, which the Plug-in Hybrid Research Center is inside of, sort of. It's part of their research into electric, hydrogen, and biofuels. We do a comparative research on all those pathways as well as petroleum pathways in this transportation area. But there was an effort here to make a particular focus on electric transportation, and certainly things have moved along very quickly in the last few years. Since 2007, we started off calling it the Plug-in Hybrid Electric Vehicle Research Center, and now we have battery electric vehicles come on strong, so we've changed the name to PH and EV Research Center at UC Davis. We have an advisory council with many of the people in this audience, the utilities, car companies, as well as air quality management districts and the Department of Energy, who are advisors on our research. Some of our activities, this is the bragging list a little bit from the last 3 years. I won't spend too much time on it, but we have been lucky to raise additional funds, also with the recent federal fund programs, also working with the ETEC and Chrysler programs. Again, the Advisory Council, we've developed a research roadmap for the state of California. What are the important things the state can be doing? And that research roadmap is over at the Energy Commission, is about ready to be published. We are co-founders and co-organizers of the plug-in conferences, which I think you have a card on your desk to see those 3 conferences, the new ones this year in San Jose. We just completed a 2-year study of 80 households, mostly in the Sacramento-Davis area, response to plug-in hybrids. Those were converted Priuses, also working with the Automobile Association in California. We used members of the California Automobile Association as people in our study. We just completed, we're just in the process of completing a 1-year study of 189 USA households with BMW and the response to the Mini E, also working together with a university in Berlin and a new university in London also. We've initiated and funding a second use of batteries project. We just awarded over $1 million on this project to study second use of batteries and how we might use those in California households to put used batteries in the household to shave peak energy as well as save energy at night. We, of course, have our publications, proud of those. We're developing future experts in this area, PhDs and masters. We also developed this institution, this research center, and are still growing, attracting more funding. So the roadmap. Just a picture of the roadmap. You can't read it here, but this roadmap is a detailed process which we worked on for 2 years with stakeholders, and so it set out some research priorities for the state. The 3 areas which are resulting, we will continue our work. We're sort of famous for this area, working with consumer behavior and working with grid-connected vehicles. We've been doing it for 20 years, and we're continuing that work and work with automakers and others in this area. We're very interested in ways to restructure the cost of automotive batteries here. They're the most expensive component. And we're also focused on this smart grid. And you heard today that we need to keep the charging on the grid at night. That's one of the big goals here. We've talked about that for many years, and we have to keep our focus on that and how to do that. Just some quick things, some quick suggestions from our research. And there's more slides in the package to tell us that you can read and see what all of our projects are, but I'll just give a couple of slides here. We know that we need leadership from the state in this area. As Jason said, there's a coalition of people coming together around this in California. Actually, I've been lucky to travel to a number of other nations where this is also happening. We're in a formative period of history here where we're going to see electric vehicles in a dozen nations across the world. And California certainly will be taking leadership, and the automotive and power industries really have to learn to work together on this. So first, a task I can suggest is we do still need, for this planning purpose, as we heard, we need a strategic plan for this, and we need a statewide assessment, some sort of scientific survey. Being a researcher, this is what I want to see, with really on-site audits of buyer parking, electrical access, attitudes, and travel needs across the state. So we really know where we're going to put our investments. We need to prioritize those investments. We need to keep this focus on nighttime charging, and also we need to understand how to build this system in order to facilitate best renewable energy growth in this state. We need to segment this market across the state and pick the low-hanging fruit with households first. Make sure we focus on those, as many of you heard this, developing people who already have easy access, have access to parking at night. We've already done one study in which we identified about 46% of California households have a place to park their vehicle at night, so we have a starting market. You can look at that two ways, half full or half empty, but I'd like to think of it as half full. We have a lot of opportunity. And then go on to those secondary markets and understand what the investment needs are there. We need to study this carefully, where you need to invest more money in infrastructure at a household and then get into those difficult household markets or multi-dwelling units or others. Should say one thing here, to keep the focus on nighttime charging. This is an issue. If we put in charging, we're behavior studiers, so we have seen that people, if you offer free electricity at work during the day, you will see people charging at work during the day instead of at home at night. So we need to understand how to develop the system in the future to avoid those types of problems for our system. We need a public outreach and education plan. Certainly lots of people in the audience here are working out in utilities. We don't have quite a statewide process for that. And we need to give people opportunity to drive these vehicles. In all our research in the 20 years, the one thing about electric vehicles we find is that people need to drive them. Once they drive them, they really like them. Working on the BMW project, people love that car, all the cars we've seen people drive. But you hear a lot of people thinking they're still golf carts or something, but really we need programs in which we offer access for driving these vehicles. And again, batteries are the expensive thing. They're going to cost more. It's going to take 10 years to drive down these batteries. And still at that point, batteries will be expensive. Strategies can include some new financing options, these second lives, and also reducing the end-life costs of batteries. And I'll stop it right there from a presentation. There's more slides if you want to see the rest of the activities of the Research Center.
I was just going to acknowledge Mr. Swanson with a question.
Well, thank you so much for your presentation, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman. Maybe I have more of a statement than a question, but this has been very informative, and I think that just by looking at the progress that has been made with hybrid vehicles and how many of the issues that people weren't comfortable with the introduction of hybrids, those questions have been answered, and I think electric vehicles will have the same kind of success. I drive a hybrid for the last 3 years, Ford Escape. Didn't compromise on power or performance, so it answered all important questions. And I don't think that we're going to be able to get to everything we have to do here until we also committed to keeping our incentives in place, as was mentioned in your presentation, as well as being committed to the infrastructure demand in partnership with the federal government and its incentives, but the state also offering the proper incentives. It seems to me that there are people that are willing to invest in making sure that there are enough infrastructure developments that they could be in place to make this work. But it's clearly a partnership that has to take place, and so I'm very impressed with the investment. I remember in the late 80s and 90s, early 90s, when we were closing military bases, at least in Northern California and at Alameda, we were looking at with CalSTART, and working to try to advance this notion then. And there were a lot more people skeptical about what we're trying to do, but the point is that this is very impressive. And I think the hearing has been very impressive, and my hope is that we would double our efforts to provide the kind of incentives and encouragement that will keep the private investment coming and also put California at the forefront. So that's more of a statement than a question. But I think that the fact that our manufacturers in their presentation now display 14 or more examples of hybrid vehicles now, luxury hybrids, big hybrids, small hybrids, and all making an impact. And then the advancements that have been made in battery technology just makes all of this possible. And I would just hope that we see this as an opportunity as part of a technological revolution that California can get in front of. So thank you for your presentation.
Ms. Skinner.
I have a couple of questions and comments. In the last presentation, I don't want to put this inaccurately, but there could be sense to kind of, and I mean in all of them, a kind of disparate focus on when and how to charge, sort of the research on that, which seems to be focused a bit on nighttime, on garages, which tend to be more in the single-family residence, and you know, that sort of thing, versus the circumstances that may be faced, at least initially in the near term, by the likely users of an EV. If, as we look in the near term, the plug-in EV is going to tend to be a smaller vehicle, and so far, at least the market research I've seen shows a kind of appetite for that type of vehicle by people who live in more denser areas, you know, not just San Francisco, obviously, but in more denser areas where perhaps there's either more multifamily units or units without garages, that are areas where the distance, the trip is shorter. So how do we design both the infrastructure and send the right policy signals so that we're not in a circumstance where we've either designed policies or infrastructure that deal with the first thing, which is, you know, maybe nighttime charging and in a garage, when the user may be very different?
I'd like to take a shot at that if I could. So for my driving, I drive the BMW Mini E as my normal commuter, and I use no gasoline at all in my commute. And most of my driving is on my Mini. The car has an 80-mile range. My commute is 15 miles. The average in the United States vehicle usage per day is 29 miles.
Right.
So for the most part, all of these cars will get you off of gasoline for your daily use. Today, it wouldn't make it. It's about 100 miles here from my office, and so I had to get in my gasoline car. I have the two-car solution. I'm an occasional sinner. But my commute is, I'm off of gasoline for my commute, and I don't go to the gas station very often. It's just when I come up here. But there are other solutions, too. There's several solutions to the road trip. The Chevy Volt has a range of hundreds of miles. Again, on your commute, it's all electric for your commute. It has a 40-mile all-electric range. So on daily use, you'll never use any gasoline with your Chevy Volt. But if I had one today, they won't sell me one yet, but if I had one today, I would have driven it here because it has a gasoline generator that comes on for when the battery depletes. So you can go anywhere in that car. It's a no-compromise car. It's all electric when the battery is big enough, and it switches to a gasoline generator when it's not. Another solution is what Better Place does, right? You could have a swappable battery, and so when the battery depletes, change your battery. And so it's another way of getting there. And finally, you can do what Tesla does, which is put in an enormous battery, a relatively expensive car. You know, their goal is to have a battery that'll take you 500 miles, which is farther than any human being wants to drive in a day. So you put a station at home and you put a station at hotels and you're done. So you're right, there are different needs, but we are out there addressing them all. And we believe there are solutions for all drivers today, that we have the technology for all drivers. It's a little pricey, and that's why we appreciate the federal and state incentives to get consumer acceptance up.
And maybe one sentence. I agree 100% with Richard on all the solutions out there. I just want to caution from looking at one behavior based on early adopters, because we're assuming something that the car is more expensive. We're assuming something that is not necessarily true once you decouple the car from the battery and the battery becomes part of the ownership of the service provider. That is like the mobile industry saying in the early days that no one's going to buy a $2,000 Motorola like was mentioned here before. But once the infrastructure's out there, the Verizons and the AT&Ts and Vodafones put out the infrastructure there, they could amortize that infrastructure over a larger scale of subscribers. So bottom line is there will be lots of different models. It'll be dangerous to do legislation and policy based on anticipated behaviors of early adopters.
I just want to add that in our research, we don't find that distinction between sort of urban village vehicles versus suburban vehicles among potential buyers. So, I mean, I understand that from sort of planning perspective of cities in Europe, and some cities view it as a sort of an inner city vehicle. It's been discussed as that because of the size issue. But actually, from the standpoint of users we study, we're travel behavior experts, and so from the travel behavior side, we don't see a big distinction. The distances are adequate, particularly in multi-vehicle households. So people make choices about which vehicle they take.
And if I just follow up, the other thing that's been touched on in various of the panels and by some of our legislative colleagues' questions is, of course, how do we roll out the right policies that still allow us, that help with the transition to really moving to a large percentage of our fleet, of all the vehicles used in California being these kind of EVs, either whether plug-ins, hybrids, whatever. But while we're still providing funding and financing for our infrastructure, and we're creating a situation where the user pays versus other ratepayers subsidizing the users. I mean, the example was given that perhaps, for workplace it should be provided free. And of course, if that is the case, then, people without the EV are not, in other words, and that could be so if we even did public charging stations or not. But how do some thoughts on, as we move forward, those kind of.
If I may. So it's our thought that there's no sustainable business that depends on subsidies. And so although we're very happy to have your help to get this started and get some momentum, in particular in infrastructure, that San Francisco needs a few charging stations, so somebody there will buy a Volt and get the ball rolling, and then the ball will roll. But our business is entirely based on the capitalist system. We don't want to come back here next year and ask for money. We want the drivers to pay for the value of their fuel. It's still about going to be less than half the cost of gasoline, a lot cheaper than gasoline. But if they'll pay for that, then we can build the infrastructure, and we can build it between our venture capital money and what the drivers will be willing to pay. We'll build out this infrastructure, and we won't be back here asking for money. It will grow nicely. Most of the projections say that there's 3 million cars globally by 2015. That's a lot of business for us to go and base an industry on. And we see an industry here. If we want to get fast adoption, we'll need a little bit of help now, but we don't want to depend on it.
And I guess what I'd like to say is that I think in California we're fortunate because we have many of the policies in place already that are going to bring these vehicles to successful market, and I mean large-scale market. But the one thing that I think the Energy Commission pointed out earlier that is still needed, and Professor Turrentine mentioned it, we need more collaboration among state government and stakeholders, and because I don't know that we are aware yet of the gaps, the policy gaps necessarily for large-scale deployment. I mean, I feel like when I talk to people outside the state and the automakers about why they're coming to California, they're coming here because they think that we have the programs in place to attract the vehicles, and because the people of California love these kinds of vehicles. They embrace new technology and they embrace green solutions. So we are in a really ideal position here in California, but I think as we go forward, there is a huge need for education, as Assemblymember Lowenthal pointed out, and a little bit more collaboration is needed among state government stakeholders. And I think the Energy Commission is sort of focused on that along with the Air Board and the PUC right now.
And I think I'd like to provide a proof point to Richard's point that the marginal, once you get through that initial fixed cost barrier, is there. We've ordered 100,000 vehicles from Renault. This is not government funded. Of course, where you're going to position those vehicles is in countries where the competition, oil and gas, is more expensive. So we've ordered 100,000. It's the largest EV order in history because in Denmark and Israel, you could make a tremendous amount of margin. Now, it's just a question of time before that production capacity leads to better and better margins on those miles that these EVs are driving. So the margin is there. It's how do you get through the initial fixed cost, which is deploying some of this infrastructure, so the marginal mile can be accessed, which is cheaper than gasoline.
Ms. Skinner, you're okay? Okay. Ms. Lowenthal?
I'm sorry I had to step out for a few minutes, and I think Ms. Skinner asked one of my questions. Eileen, I think you are saying that there's more that you need from state government, and I think all of us are up here because we want to know the specifics of what it is we can do. So I would throw that back to you. I'm so impressed with what has been done thus far, but how can we help? There's research being done that has clearly shown some of the preferences on the part of the public. But what sorts of policies can we be developing that may not be in place yet? And I would ask that of any of you.
Well, I'll start with it, but because I think what I'm trying to say is that a lot of the policies that are needed are in place now. The question, I'm sure there are others that are needed, and there's some education and outreach components that the Senate side is looking at. We certainly need that. And this collaboration is just kind of starting. I know the PUC has started it with their proceeding. They had a joint hearing with the Air Board and the Energy Commission. The Energy Commission is sort of leading a collaborative effort with stakeholders, or starting to think about how to do that. So I feel like that process is actually happening, and on some level, the collaboration and the education probably will point out the need for new policies going forward. But I can't tell you what those are right now. I really feel like, and I know from talking to external stakeholders, that this state has all the right policies in place now, and we have done an amazing job, and it's about now it's about education, collaboration, and consumer acceptance of this new technology.
I would add the three things that I mentioned before. One is the clarity of the business, competitive business environment. PUC has done the first step. I think the legislator can support that. That's one very clear and tactical thing that could be done. Second thing is on the infrastructure. When I say, or when Richard says you need a boost, to quantify that, it's not that expensive, but you need to break through with that infrastructure a little bit. And the third thing, which is actually a net positive, is extending the $5,000 to as long as the federals are providing $75,000, because what you're doing is you're diverting federal money from other states directly to come to the California economy. Those three things could be great to boost this market and make California the leader 10, 20 years out in the industry.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Oh, just a quick thing on the education. It's surprising when we do survey work on knowledge. So we study what's the knowledge of California buyers or American buyers. And we even, in a recent 2007 survey, we discovered as many as 1/3 of California buyers and a higher proportion of national buyers really didn't understand hybrid vehicles still, for example, thought it was a vehicle you plugged in. So there's tremendous need, and that's people who buy new cars. That was a specific sample. So the education component is important, and there are ways which we can educate our population about what the options are going to be.
And, were you going to say something?
just going to add a final word. That I'm going to say it again, even though Jason said it. We need reinforcement of the PUC's decision, their proposed decision. That's quite important and detailed, and they're continuing to go in the right direction of setting some incentive pricing and whatnot. That decision is what makes the competitive markets start to work here and gets our venture capital and all that playing. So that's why it's so important to us. Secondly, here's a small thing that hasn't come up yet, but in places like British Columbia now, they have a building rule that says when you build a garage, you have to put in basically wiring for an electric charging station. You don't have to put it in, but at the time you build a garage, it's very much cheaper, and then the installation is the cost for installation is reduced by 2/3. So a building policy like that, even though generally a local jurisdiction, would be very helpful to us.
I had some questions before that. I just wanted to make sure we have public comments, and if that's what the individuals are lining up against the wall, I just would be remiss if we didn't give them opportunity to participate in this. And I know these folks have come before as our subject experts on this matter, but sometimes it's the public where you get the most information. So if you wouldn't mind, go right ahead. State your name.
I'm Mark Geller. I'm a co-founder of Plug-in America. In various ways, we at Plug-in America have been working for 10 years, maybe more, to accelerate the shift to plug-in vehicles powered by clean, affordable domestic electricity, to reduce our nation's dependence on petroleum and improve the environment. Our organization today represents the hundreds, maybe a few thousand people who drive ZEV vehicles. But more importantly, we hope to represent, and we will represent, the millions of people who will be driving the vehicles we've been talking about here. I just want to touch on a few points regarding the laws and regulations. In a certain way, the ZEV program has worked. When Jason referred to somebody who drove here from San Francisco today in an electric car, it was me. It was not a big complication. He made it sound a little bit like there might have been some sacrifice. I woke up, I unplugged the car, I drove here, I arrived, I plugged into a charger here 2 blocks away. It has long been full already. I will go to a full car, I will drive home. And that's what, people want, driving without gasoline at all. That car is 8 years old, was compelled by the state of California. That's the only reason the car exists. And it today has 78,000 miles on the original battery and still drives well over 100 miles. And we are back here today talking about building cars that go 100 miles without gasoline. The success was achieved 15 years ago, essentially, and we're picking up a ball that on some level we dropped. We're on the cusp of achieving the lofty ambition that the ZEV program set out many years ago. But we must remember, the ZEV program today projects 7,500 vehicles between 2012 and 2014. The numbers of vehicles that Tesla, Nissan, and GM have already told us they're going to be bringing to California well exceed the demand, essentially, of the state of California. It's really time for us to ask for more, or at least to institute policies that accept the fact that the market is outstripping the regulations. So to achieve these greenhouse gas reductions, petroleum reductions, there's really no better investment than these plug-in vehicles. So therefore, there are a few things we've got to do. One, we've got to make sure that the ZEV regulation is performance-based and technology neutral. A freeway-capable ZEV is a ZEV. The more widely and quickly accepted by the market technology ought to be that which is further supported. We can't say that those cars that seem to be coming to the market are the ones that need less support, and that the technologies that are not coming to market are the ones that will need more support. That seems to have it all really backwards. The early rollout in California offers us an opportunity that can be leveraged and accelerated to get tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of more cars in California. And if we don't continue to support this effort to bring cars in California, they will go to other countries or other states. we need to make sure that the 118 funds that are going to support infrastructure and vehicle purchases continue to have enough money to do so.
Sir, we need to wrap up. It's
okay.
Over 3 minutes.
Okay, I think we shouldn't be scared of the implications that the grid or the local grid can't handle it. I have a house in San Francisco, 125 amp circuit. It supports my house, pretty big house, supports the car. Everything is really in place to move this going forward. This is not rocket science. Let's just do it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, members. My name is Dorothy Rothrock. I'm with the California Manufacturers and Technology Association. And in this hearing, I'm representing industrial ratepayers. As we've heard, there's going to be a great increase in demand on the system, the electric system, and my members pay electricity rates that are about 45% above the national average. I think what we will be seeing is over time, as demand increases, the new supplies coming onto the system are likely to be a little more expensive than what we're paying now. And as the SMUD gentleman mentioned, the utilities may be subject to increased greenhouse gas emission reductions because they're taking on, frankly, the cleanup of two systems rather than just one. And I want to make sure that we don't put any more pressure on industrial rates through these higher costs, because when industrial load leaves the state and goes somewhere else that has less stringent regulations, that's leakage, and that's an environmental problem that would go counter to what you're trying to solve here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Lenny Goldberg on behalf of TURN, representing small ratepayers, and I do apologize because I missed some of the middle sections of the hearing. I did hear the Ms. Ryan's presentation early on with regard to Public Utilities Commission issues. We as small ratepayers are very concerned about how rate structures work, how subsidies work. We are very much opposed to providing any direct subsidies to vehicle users. That said, we hope that in nighttime charging and time of use metering, that in fact the better day-round 24-hour utilization of the grid will bring some benefits to the grid. That is to say, a lot of electricity will be sold in the middle of the night that wouldn't otherwise be sold, which speaks to the revenue requirements of the utilities to an extent. We would hope that to that extent, then the question becomes, what are the stresses and strains on the distribution system, and who's going to pay for them? Right now, maybe with the exception of Cash for Clunkers, a small program, neither taxpayers nor ratepayers pay for anybody else's car. People earn their money and they buy their cars. We believe that that should be the fundamental principle here, that ratepayers who do not have electric cars should not be subsidizing them. I think Ms. Buchanan's question earlier is, if we got rid of all the gas, and who's going to be paying for the roads, which does, I thought, does raise a number of questions if we have much less utilization of the infrastructure that's currently in place. But we have weighed in at the Public Utilities Commission along the lines of saying ratepayers should not be subsidizing other people's automobile purchases, nor their individual charging infrastructure. And then we've been looking at the questions of how our distribution system upgrades generally handled, and they are generally spread to all ratepayers at this point, but we would have concerns and hope that the benefits of 24-hour utilization of the grid can cover those costs. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Bonnie Holmes-Jen with the American Lung Association in California, and greatly appreciate you holding this hearing and focusing on this critical need to get EV ready in California. And wanted to let you know that the American Lung Association strongly supports the need for a strong and rapid rollout of electric vehicles in California to achieve our air quality, public health, and greenhouse gas reduction goals. And we like to remind policymakers that for every electric vehicle on the road, that means less pollution, that triggers asthma attacks, sends people to the hospital for respiratory and cardiac illnesses, and less pollution contributing to premature death. As you've heard today, the state has adopted many important policies to support EVs, and there are other opportunities coming up for state leadership, and we encourage you to continue providing that leadership. And just to mention a few, we encourage you to work with cities and counties to make sure that they are EV ready and help them to provide the necessary charging infrastructure and the assistance to consumers who want to purchase these vehicles and need to get their charging infrastructure up and ready in their homes. We also encourage you to continue supporting the Energy Commission's AB 118 program. We believe this is extremely important, both to provide the consumer incentives and to provide the funding for necessary infrastructure as we ramp up EVs in California. We encourage you to continue supporting the zero-emission vehicle program at the Air Board. And, of course, the board will be considering some strengthening amendments later this year and more ambitious goals. And, of course, to adopt the 33% renewable energy standard to support clean, renewable electricity generation. Many other opportunities, but want to state our strong support. Thanks for the hearing.
Thank you.
Hi, Megan Norris, Sierra Club, California. I would like to thank you for holding this hearing in support of electric vehicles. On behalf of our 200,000 activists and members of Sierra Club, California, we sent a letter back in November to Chair Mary Nichols of the California Air Resources Board. And in that letter, we advocated for increased volumes of ZEVs, in particular, battery electric vehicles. With petroleum vehicles being a leading contributor to global warming in California, we need to start taking the right steps to reduce our dangerous dependence on oil, clean up air for our kids and future generations, create new jobs through advancements in EV technology, and save consumers money at the gas pump. We look forward to working with you and the California Air Resources Board in California's leadership role in strengthening our clean car programs so we can get EVs on the road as soon as possible. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for coming down. Last speaker.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you, committee members, for taking my comments. I'm John Shears, Clean Transportation Program Lead at the Center for Energy Efficiency and Renewable Technologies. Just want to speak to some of the issues that were raised earlier today and remind us all to keep in mind a system-wide approach when we're thinking about all of these issues. EVs, which we strongly support as one of the ZEV technologies, lies at the intersection of a lot of the different policies, some of which Bonnie mentioned. I want to touch upon the issue around renewables and climate greenhouse gas emissions. It was mentioned that with increased load on the stationary side, the utilities may have to likely have to address some increased emissions on the stationary side. What wasn't, I think, pointed out was the fact that through the low carbon fuel standard, which is a policy that's been implemented and will be going under regular reviews at the ARB, there's a program underway to monetize the emissions reductions on the utility side that are associated with transportation. And that is through a market mechanism for the reduced reductions on the transportation side. So part of the issues that are being explored through the PUC at the ARB and is exactly where the PUC will have to go in terms of how it will allow the utilities to use those revenues that are realized through the monetization of the low carbon fuel standard credits. So the issue of costs, it's still early days in terms of the policy discussion and the regulatory framework that's being developed at the agencies to address this. So while, yes, there are concerns about increased emissions on the stationary side, I think the agencies and stakeholders are still exploring whether those costs can be deferred through the low carbon fuel standard and how those the revenues from that are directed by the PUC for utility use. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no other public comment, Mr. Bradford, do you have some final words?
I just had a question. I didn't know if anyone was still here from the PUC. I guess not, because my questions, and maybe someone at this panel could answer it as it relates to uniformity and state and federal guidelines for charging stations, and more importantly, uniformity in the apparatus from the car manufacturers, because it seems like there's might be some different opinions and different moving parts on how to address this. So I'm just saying, where are we with uniformity?
I'll take some of that. So we do have a standardized automobile connector now for the United States, and Japan has adopted the same one. It's called the J1772 connector from a Society of Automotive Engineers committee name, which was J1772. So we're pretty good in that respect. We're looking forward to do another one soon for higher speed charging. So I think the physical side is fine. There's some cars that came out earlier than that standard, and we're all adapting to those, but going forward they'll match this J1772 standard, so that's quite good. In terms of regulations, it's a bit of a problem. So I went to FERC to see if we could get a federal ruling on what the PUC is ruling on here in California now, which is basically, is there a business model that'll work for companies like Better Place and ours? And FERC was not willing to deal with it because of states' rights concerns. And by the way, they suggested that I go to California, and whatever California decides, the rest of the country will adopt. So that's why we are so active in California, even though it's only one state out of a world. But it is quite the leading platform for how this is going to get done. And so we put a lot of our energy, so to speak, into the PUC and to hearings here with the legislators of California. So thanks.
And I didn't know if it was anyone from the utility. That I think everybody's left.
Yeah.
But I was wondering how they're viewing
PG&E.
PG&E. Okay. As it relates to retail charging centers, will they be viewed as direct access providers? I'm just curious on how that will be looked upon, or if they chose to sell that electricity at that charging station versus give it away. So, I mean, and it might be a question you can't answer, but these are some that have been developed through all this good testimony today that have come to bear, I should say. So, I just like to get that out there. Maybe it's in the future if you can't answer it today.
Thank you for the opportunity to respond. Maybe I should have left with my other IOU brethren. Lessons learned. The direct access piece is actually going to be answered by the PUC. They issued their preliminary decision on the OIR last Friday. That is one of the heart of the questions, right? It's like relative to third parties. What is how do third parties procure their power? And from a public policy perspective, California has a deep history relative to environmental principles, and and I think there's two aspects to the question. The environmental principles that go with direct access. And I think the other one is that's going to be decided in this OIR and this preliminary decision, and then the rebuttal period is the cost recovery expectations for third-party providers. It's if you're going to drop in 3 fast chargers in the middle of San Francisco, and there's going to be infrastructure investments that are required at the distribution level to support mid-afternoon charging. Then that, from a policy perspective, that will be addressed in this OIR, and we actually really look forward to this next period of rebuttal, because this is we will table this relative to the jurisdictional purview of the PUC, and then it's as part of that process they'll bring in the stakeholders from the state as well, relative to the other public policy planning agencies, the CEC and CARB as well. Okay.
I just want to thank my co-chair, Chairwoman Lowenthal, and the members of both Transportation and Utilities for participating in this hearing today, and for those members who are still here. Most importantly, our presenters who have provided us with a wealth of information and left us with a whole lot to think about as we move forward. It's no doubt that the technology is here. And I think our biggest challenge is how do we implement it, and how do we make it affordable for all folks. And as has been stated by Turn, also making sure that ratepayers are protected as we move forward with implementing this new technology. Or I shouldn't say it's not new; it's been around for quite some time. But as we move forward and flooding the market, hopefully with electric vehicles and greater usage throughout California and this nation, that all those things are considered. So I just want to thank those who've come out and participated. It's been very enlightening discussion, and we look forward to continuing dialogue in this area. So thank you, Ms. Lowenthal.
And thank you as well to everyone that participated, to our colleagues, to the consultants who gave us some wonderful tips on the preparation for this hearing. It is only the first hearing. We are hoping to have one in Southern California soon, but I think that the hearing helped us to ask even more questions than you were able to answer in just a few short hours. I thought it was interesting, Mr. Lowenthal, that you said that FERC advised you to go to California because California doesn't always have the best of relationships with the Federal Energy Regulating Commission, but we all here believe that as California goes, so goes the nation. And so I, for one, want to commit to all of you a very strong, long-lasting interest in moving along the electric vehicles, and hope that at some point they will be widespread and that we will, in fact, meet our goals. When I came up with the idea for this hearing, it had been after understanding and reading about so many new electric cars that were going to come on the market. And I thought to myself, you know, if I'm going to buy one, I need to know that somewhere on Interstate 5, when I drive to Southern California, somewhere between Harris Ranch and Visalia, I need to know where the charging stations are. So I do think that we've made a lot of progress, and we will make a lot more, and hope to see all of you in our offices and in the near future. Thank you so much.